Picture this, a world submerged, a civilization washed away, a lone survivor clinging to a makeshift raft as endless waters swallow everything they ever knew. It's a story you think you know: the Great Flood, the divine punishment, the promise of a new beginning. But what if I told you that this story isn't unique to one culture, one religion, or even one continent? What if nearly every civilization that has ever risen has also told a version of this cataclysmic tale? From the icy fjords of Scandinavia to the humid rainforests of the Amazon, humanity has whispered these stories for millennia, passing them down like precious, water-worn heirlooms. We're about to set sail on a journey far deeper and more mysterious than you might expect, a voyage into the heart of 30 forgotten flood myths, narratives that time itself has nearly washed away. But this is more than just a collection of ancient stories. These myths are like fingerprints left on the pages of history, each one revealing something profound about the people who told them. They speak of survival, yes, but also of fear, of hope, of humanity's stubborn will to carry on even when the world seems determined to wash us away. They're reflections of real events: melting glaciers, rising sea levels, tsunamis that swallowed coastlines whole. They're also mirrors of our deepest emotions: our awe of nature's power, our longing for redemption, our unshakable belief that even after disaster, life can begin again. These stories have been tucked away in dusty scrolls, carved into forgotten temple walls, and sung in languages no one speaks anymore, until now. So come with me. Let's travel across continents and centuries, tracing these ancient narratives like rivers flowing into a single, powerful sea. We'll meet heroes you've never heard of, gods whose names have faded from memory, and civilizations that left little behind except their stories of great floods. This isn't just a history lesson, it's an exploration of what it means to be human, to face the unimaginable, and to still find a way to tell the tale. By the time we're done, you'll see these echoes of the flood not as separate myths, but as chapters in one extraordinary story, ours. Our journey begins in the cradle of civilization itself, the fertile land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. It is here, in ancient Mesopotamia, that we find the oldest flood story ever written down, a tale that would echo for thousands of years. This isn't the story of Noah you might be familiar with. This is the original, found etched onto crumbling clay tablets in the ruins of a great library in Nineveh, belonging to an Assyrian king named Ashurbanipal. The story is a part of the Epic of Gilgamesh, one of humanity's oldest surviving works of literature. In his quest for immortality, the legendary King Gilgamesh seeks out a man who has already achieved it, the sage Utnapishtim. Utnapishtim then recounts his incredible story. He tells Gilgamesh how the Council of Gods, led by Enlil, grew weary of the noise and clamor of humanity and decided to wipe them all out with a great flood. But one god, E, took pity on mankind. He secretly spoke to Utnapishtim, who was a faithful servant, not through direct words, but by speaking to the reed walls of his hut. He instructed him to tear down his house and use the materials to build a great cube-shaped boat, telling his suspicious neighbors he was building it to escape the wrath of the god Enlil, and would thereafter descend to live with E in the watery depths. He was to bring the seed of all living creatures, his family, and his craftsmen onto this vessel. Utnapishtim obeyed, and for 7 days he built the massive boat. Then the storm came. For 6 days and 6 nights, the winds raged and the flood swept across the land, so terrifying that even the gods themselves cowered in fear and regretted their decision. On the 7th day, the storm calmed. Utnapishtim's boat came to rest on Mount Nisir, and he waited. He sent out a dove, but it returned, finding no place to land. He sent out a swallow, and it also came back. Finally, he sent out a raven, which saw the waters receding and found land, so it did not return. Knowing it was safe, Utnapishtim and his passengers disembarked, and he made a sacrifice to the gods. The sweet smell of the offering drew the gods to them, and while Enlil was initially angry that anyone had survived, he convinced him of his error. As a reward for preserving life, the gods granted Utnapishtim and his wife the gift of immortality. The parallels to the later biblical story of Noah are simply too striking to ignore. The divine warning, the building of a specific boat, the saving of animals, the grounding on a mountain, and the sending out of birds to find dry land. This Mesopotamian version is centuries older, suggesting a common origin, a story that traveled and transformed through cultures and time. But beyond the literary connection, there's a compelling archaeological one. In the 1920s, Sir Leonard Woolley, while excavating the ancient Sumerian city of Ur, discovered a massive layer of clean, water-laid clay, nearly 3 meters thick, buried deep beneath the city's foundations. This stratum, devoid of any human artifacts, suggested a catastrophic flood event of immense proportions around 4,000 years ago, a real-world disaster that could very well have been the seed from which the epic legend of Utnapishtim first grew. From the fertile plains of Mesopotamia, we now sail across the Mediterranean to the sun-drenched mountains of ancient Greece, where the gods on Mount Olympus watched the deeds of humanity with a far less patient eye. Here, the Great Flood was not born from divine annoyance at humanity's noise, but from its profound moral failings. This is the story of Deucalion and Pirha, a tale of cosmic justice and a very strange new beginning. The age was one of bronze, and the race of humans who lived then had become violent, greedy, and irreverent. Their arrogance knew no bounds, and they had forgotten how to honor the gods who created them. Zeus, the king of the gods, decided the entire human experiment was a failure. He resolved to wipe the slate clean, to wash the world free of its corruption with a deluge that would leave no trace of this wicked generation. But Zeus was not without mercy. There was one man, Deucalion, the son of the Titan Prometheus, who was known for his piety and just character, and there was his wife, Pirha, who was equally righteous. Prometheus, who had foresight, warned his son of the impending doom. He instructed Deucalion to build a large chest or ark and to stock it with provisions. When the skies finally darkened and the storms began, Deucalion and Pirha sealed themselves inside their wooden vessel. For 9 days and nights, Zeus unleashed his fury. Torrential rains merged the sea with the sky, swallowing the hills and drowning the mountains until the entire world was nothing but a churning, lifeless ocean. Every city, every temple, every last person was consumed by the waves. When the waters finally receded, their chest came to rest on the slopes of Mount Parnassus, the only peak visible above the endless sea. Alone in a silent, empty world, the couple climbed out and made their way to a temple of Themis, the goddess of divine law. They prayed for guidance, asking how they, just 2 people, could possibly restore the human race. The goddess's voice echoed from the temple, giving them a cryptic command. "Depart from my temple, veil your heads, and cast behind you the bones of your great mother." At first, they were horrified. To desecrate the bones of their ancestors was a terrible sacrilege, but Deucalion, the son of the clever Prometheus, pondered the riddle. He realized that your great mother could mean Mother Earth herself, and her bones were the stones that lay upon the ground. Trusting this interpretation, they covered their heads as a sign of reverence and did as they were told. They walked away from the temple without looking back and cast stones over their shoulders. A miracle occurred. Every stone thrown by Deucalion transformed into a man sturdy and strong. Every stone thrown by Pirha became a woman, resilient and life-giving. In this way, a new, hardier race of humans sprang directly from the earth itself, a people literally forged from stone to repopulate the world. Unlike other myths where animals are saved, the Greek focus is purely on humanity's rebirth, a reflection of their world centered on human reason and resilience. Scholars have long pondered if this powerful myth holds a kernel of historical truth, much like the layer of clay at Ur. The Greek Bronze Age, the time of mighty palaces like Mycenae and Knossos, ended not with a single event but with a series of catastrophic collapses around 1200 BC. The causes are still debated: foreign invasions, internal rebellions, widespread drought, and perhaps most intriguingly, massive geological upheaval. There is compelling evidence that the entire Mediterranean region was rocked by a period of intense seismic activity, which could have triggered devastating tsunamis that wiped out coastal settlements. Imagine a series of colossal waves sent by the earthshaker god Poseidon himself, crashing into the shorelines of ancient Greece. Such an event would have been interpreted as nothing less than the wrath of Zeus, a divine flood sent to punish a failing civilization. The story of Deucalion and Pirha, then, could be the cultural memory of survivors who clung to high ground, watching their world vanish beneath the waves, and who then had to literally start civilization over from scratch, building a new people from the hard, unyielding stone of the mountains that saved them. While the Greeks saw a single divine punishment, the ancient sages of India envisioned a far grander and more cyclical view of catastrophe and renewal. Their flood narrative is not a one-time event but an integral part of the endless rhythm of the cosmos, a necessary cleansing at the end of each great age or yuga. This profound story is centered on the first man, Manu, and a miraculous, wisdom-filled fish. The tale begins simply with Manu, a kind and devout king, performing his morning ablutions in a river. As he cupped water in his hands, a small fish swam into his palms. The fish spoke to him, pleading for its life, afraid it would be eaten by larger creatures in the vast waters. Moved by compassion, Manu placed the tiny fish into a small jar of water, but the fish grew, and rapidly. Soon it outgrew the jar, then a large tank, then even a great lake. Realizing this was no ordinary creature, Manu reverently carried the now gigantic fish to the ocean. It was then that the fish revealed its true identity. It was Matsya, the first avatar of the great preserver god, Lord Vishnu, who takes form to protect the world whenever the cosmic balance is threatened. Lord Vishnu, speaking through the magnificent fish, gave Manu a grave warning. He explained that the current age was decaying, its virtue spent, and that a great pralaya, a cataclysmic deluge that dissolves the universe, was imminent. The oceans would rise and merge with the heavens, swallowing the entire world in a watery dissolution. But because of Manu's piety and his act of simple kindness, he would be saved. Vishnu instructed him to build a massive, sturdy ark and to bring aboard the seeds of every plant, a pair of every animal, and the 7 great sages, the Saptarishi, to preserve the knowledge of the world. When the fearsome day arrived, the skies tore open and the seas began to boil, rising up to claim the land. As the waters surged, Manu's ark was tossed upon the furious waves. True to his word, the gigantic Matsya avatar appeared, now with a magnificent golden horn gleaming upon its head. Vishnu commanded Manu to tie the ark to this horn using the great serpent Vasuki, who served as a divine rope. For untold ages, it is said, the fish towed the ark safely through the raging, endless sea, protecting it from the storm until the waters finally receded and the ark came to rest upon the highest peak of the Himalayas. From this sanctuary, Manu, the sole surviving man, and the seeds and creatures he protected became the progenitors of the new world, the next cycle of creation. This myth is so much more than a simple flood story. It is a masterclass in Vedic philosophy. The central theme is not wrath but preservation. Vishnu doesn't send the flood as a punishment. He appears to mitigate its effects and ensure life continues. The flood itself is a natural, inevitable part of the cosmic cycle, a necessary reset button for the universe. The image of the fish, a creature that begins small and vulnerable, entirely dependent on human compassion, only to become the colossal savior of all life, is a powerful metaphor for how small acts of dharma or righteous duty can grow to have cosmic consequences. Manu's survival is a direct result of his virtue, his adherence to his duty of protection, mirroring Vishnu's own duty to protect the cosmic order. geographically, the story is deeply rooted in the Indian subcontinent. The ark's resting place on the Himalayas anchors the myth in a very real, awe-inspiring location sacred to Hindu tradition. Furthermore, the region is no stranger to devastating monsoonal floods, particularly in the vast floodplains of the Ganges and Indus rivers. The annual cycle of destruction and fertile renewal brought by these floods perfectly mirrors the mythological cycle of pralaya and rebirth, suggesting the story evolved as a way to explain and find meaning in the powerful and often unforgiving forces of nature that shaped ancient Indian life. Leaving behind the cosmic cycles of India, we travel now to a land of ancient wisdom, where the very concept of time is woven into the fabric of the earth itself. In the diverse cultures of Aboriginal Australia, flood myths are not distant tales of punishment or preservation. They are living stories etched into the landscape, continuous accounts of creation that explain how the world and its sacred laws came to be. This is the Dreamtime, or the dreaming, a timeless era when ancestral spirit beings moved across the formless earth, shaping its mountains, rivers, and deserts through their epic journeys and actions. And among the most powerful of these creators is the Rainbow Serpent, a being of immense power who often brings life-giving water, but also cataclysmic floods that carve the world into its present form. One profound narrative comes from the Gunditjmara people of what is now southwestern Victoria. Their country is a landscape defined by water, marked by the ancient aquaculture systems of Budgebim, and their creation story is intimately tied to it. They tell of a great ancestor, a being of immense power often associated with the Rainbow Serpent, who slept deep beneath the earth for countless ages. When this ancestor finally awoke, it pushed its way up through the crust of the world, causing a volcanic eruption so tremendous that it spewed forth not just lava and rock, but an unimaginable deluge of water. This great flood poured out across the entire land, scouring out the valleys, filling the river systems, and creating the lakes and wetlands that define the region to this day. The Gunditjmara people see the physical evidence of this event in the very rocks beneath their feet. The eruption of the Budgebim volcano, an estimated 37,000 years ago, is a geological fact that aligns stunningly with their oral history, making this one of the oldest continuous stories ever documented. Further north, other nations tell different but equally powerful stories. For the peoples of the Kimberley region in Western Australia, the Wandjina are the supreme rain and cloud spirits, the creators of the land and all its people. In one narrative, a great flood was not a punishment but a consequence of a mistake. It is said that a group of people broke a sacred law, perhaps by hunting a forbidden animal or entering a restricted ceremonial ground. This transgression angered the Wandjina, who responded by summoning a massive cyclone from the sea. The cyclone brought with it a flood of such colossal proportions that it drowned the entire coast, forcing the people to flee inland to escape the rising waters. The Wandjina themselves are depicted in iconic rock art with large, halo-like heads and eyes that hold immense power. They are never given mouths, for it is believed that if they were to have mouths, the rains would never cease and the world would be flooded once more. This myth serves as a constant reminder of the importance of living in accordance with traditional law to maintain the delicate balance of the world. What makes these Australian flood narratives so distinct is their enduring physicality and purpose. The flood is not an event that happened once and then ended. Its results are visible everywhere. The riverbeds, the waterholes, the canyons, and the coastlines are all the direct handiwork of the ancestral beings during that creative epoch. The stories are mapped onto the land itself, and by knowing the stories, one can read the landscape like a book. This creates a profound and unbroken connection between the people, their law, and their country. The flood didn't just cleanse the world, it actively formed it, imbuing every mountain and water source with sacred meaning and a story that must be cared for. These are not myths about the end of the world, but about its ongoing creation and the perpetual responsibility of people to serve as its custodians, ensuring that the wisdom born from that great deluge is never forgotten. From the sun-scorched dreaming tracts of Australia, we now voyage into a world of ice and fire, of towering longships and gods who battle giants. The Norse world view was a stark and brutal one, shaped by the harsh realities of their northern environment, and their flood myth reflects this perfectly. It is not a tale of rain from the heavens, but a primal deluge of blood, a story of cosmic slaughter that sets the stage for the entire Norse cycle of creation and destruction. Our focus shifts to the frost giant Bergelmir, an often overlooked figure whose escape is the key to everything that follows. The story begins not with a world, but with a void called Ginnungagap, a yawning chasm between the land of fire, Muspelheim, and the land of ice, Niflheim. Where the heat and the cold met, the primordial frost melted, and from those dripping, life-giving rime drops the first being was formed, Ymir, the ancestor of all frost giants. Ymir was a hermaphroditic creature, and while he slept, more giants sweated from under his arms and sprang from his legs. From the same melting ice, a cow named Audumbla also emerged, whose milk nourished Ymir. As she licked the salty ice blocks, she uncovered another being, Beri, the first of the Aesir gods, whose grandson would be the mighty Odin. A deep enmity grew between the chaotic, brutal giants and the burgeoning race of gods. Odin, alongside his brothers Vili and Ve, led a revolt against this primordial chaos embodied by Ymir. They attacked the great giant and succeeded in slaying him. The scale of the slaughter was cataclysmic. So much blood poured from Ymir's wounds that it unleashed a torrential flood, drowning nearly the entire race of frost giants who had sprung from him. The world was drowned not in water, but in the vital fluid of its first inhabitant. This was a flood of pure, unleashed chaos, a violent reset button struck by the gods themselves. Yet, amidst this crimson deluge, one giant and his wife managed to survive. Bergelmir, who was either the son or grandson of Ymir depending on the telling, saw the catastrophe coming. He and his wife climbed into a lur, a hollowed-out tree trunk sometimes described as a kind of boat or chest. In this crude, essential vessel, they rode out the flood of blood, preserving the line of the frost giants and finding refuge on a new shore. This act directly parallels other flood survivors, but with a crucial difference. Bergelmir is not a virtuous man saved by a god. He is the enemy of the gods, the embodiment of the ancient chaos they sought to eradicate. His survival ensures that the struggle between order and chaos, between the gods of Asgard and the giants of Jotunheim, will continue for all time, ultimately leading to the final battle of Ragnarok. The symbolism here is incredibly potent and deeply rooted in the Viking experience. The flood itself, made of blood, speaks to a culture intimately familiar with the visceral reality of battle and slaughter. The world, in their view, was quite literally built from this act of violence. Odin and his brothers then used Ymir's corpse to fashion the physical world. His blood became the oceans and lakes, his flesh the earth, his bones the mountains, and his skull the sky. The entire known world is a monument to this divine murder and the subsequent flood. Bergelmir's escape vessel, a simple hollowed log, echoes the Vikings' own relationship with the sea. Their longships were their lifeline, their means of exploration, trade, and conquest, but also their only hope of survival against the treacherous, stormy waters of the North Atlantic. Bergelmir's lur is the proto-longship, a symbol of resilience and the desperate will to survive even the most overwhelming forces. Furthermore, this myth can be seen as a cultural memory of the very real environmental threats faced by Norse societies. Living in a land shaped by glaciers, they would have been acutely aware of the power of ice and water. Jökulhlaups, or glacial outburst floods, were a terrifying and unpredictable phenomenon where a glacier-dammed lake would suddenly rupture, unleashing a devastating wall of water, ice, and rock that could wipe out entire valleys. A flood caused by the melting of a primordial ice being would be a perfect mythological representation of such a catastrophic event. Bergelmir's story is thus more than a simple creation tale. It is a narrative about the necessity of struggle, the persistence of chaos, and the fragile victory of order, all framed by a people who knew their survival depended on their ability to navigate the most treacherous of waters. Across the world in ancient China, a different kind of flood narrative unfolds, one where the cataclysm is not a divine punishment to be survived, but a cosmic imbalance to be corrected through sheer human ingenuity and perseverance. This is the story of the Great Flood of Emperor Yao, a legendary event said to have lasted for generations, swallowing the land and threatening all of civilization. Unlike other myths centered on an ark, the Chinese tradition celebrates two heroic figures, a father and son, who dedicated their lives not to escaping the waters but to taming them. Their epic struggle gave rise to the legend of Gun and Yu, a tale that is less about salvation and more about the very foundations of governance and technological mastery. The flood was described in ancient texts like the Classic of History as a catastrophe of biblical proportions. Waters supposedly poured from the heavens, merging with the overflowing rivers until the entire world was submerged, leaving no distinction between the lowlands and the high hills. Society was thrown into chaos, with people forced to live in nests high in the trees or in caves dug into mountainsides, their farmlands and homes utterly destroyed. It was a breakdown of the natural and social order, a problem so immense that it demanded a solution worthy of a hero. The first to answer the call was Gun, a respected nobleman. Seeing the suffering of the people, he pleaded with the Emperor Yao to let him tackle the problem. Gun's plan was one of confrontation. He sought out the powerful Zerang, or self-renewing magical earth, from the supreme deity. With this divine material, he began constructing massive dikes and embankments, attempting to wall in the raging waters and force them to recede. For 9 long years, Gun labored, building his barriers higher and stronger. But water, as it always does, found a way. The dams inevitably burst, the pressure of the contained flood causing even greater destruction than before. Gun's failure was seen as a monumental catastrophe in itself. For his well-intentioned but flawed efforts, he was either executed or banished to a distant mountain by the succeeding Emperor Shun. In some versions of the myth, his body lay on that mountainside for 3 years without decaying, until a divine knife emerged from it, revealing his son Yu, who would carry on his father's work. Yu the Great was everything his father was not. Where Gun had tried to oppose the water's nature, Yu sought to understand and work with it. He spent years in meticulous study, traveling the length and breadth of the flooded land, surveying the topography and tracing the paths of the great rivers. He realized that the solution was not to block the water, but to guide it. He devised a monumental plan of dredging, channeling, and diverting. With a massive army of laborers, Yu began the backbreaking work of carving out new river channels, deepening existing ones, and clearing silted waterways to give the floodwaters a clear and efficient path to drain eastward into the sea. The stories of his dedication are legendary. It is said he worked for 13 years without ever returning home, so committed to his task that he passed by the doorstep of his own house 3 times, even hearing the cries of his own son, but refusing to enter lest it break his focus. His hands became calloused and claw-like from constant digging. His skin was tanned dark by the sun and wind, and his legs were permanently deformed from years of wading through mud and water. He became a living embodiment of tireless labor for the greater good. His engineering project was nothing short of brilliant. He is credited with dividing China into its 9 ancient provinces by using the newly channeled rivers as boundaries, effectively using the solution to the flood to define the very geopolitical structure of the realm. His success was total. The waters receded, the land was made fertile again, and the people could descend from their mountain refuges to rebuild their cities and farms. For this incredible achievement, Yu was rewarded not just with praise but with the mandate of heaven itself. Emperor Shun, impressed by his virtue and capability, passed the throne to him, making Yu the founder of the semi-legendary Xia dynasty, China's first hereditary ruling house. This is the ultimate meaning of the myth. The right to rule is earned through merit and profound service to the people. Yu's control of the waters was a direct metaphor for his ability to bring order to the state. Just as he channeled chaotic floods into productive rivers, a good emperor channels his people's efforts into a harmonious and prosperous society. The myth of Gun and Yu is therefore a cornerstone of Chinese political philosophy, celebrating the engineer king whose wisdom and self-sacrifice create the conditions for civilization to flourish. Far to the south, in the lush rainforests and highlands of Mesoamerica, the Maya civilization developed a cosmology where creation was not a one-time event, but a process of trial and error, with humanity itself being the final, successful iteration. Their magnificent creation epic, the Popol Vuh, tells of gods who were not easily satisfied, and their story features a flood of divine frustration aimed at wiping out a failed prototype. This is the cataclysm brought by Huracan, the one-legged god of storm, wind, and fire, whose very name means one leg and gives us our modern word hurricane. The god's initial goal was simple: to create beings who would worship them, sustain them with offerings, and remember their names. Their first attempt was to fashion people from animals. But the birds and creatures could only squawk and howl. They could not speak the names of their creators or give them proper praise. This attempt was abandoned. Next, the gods decided to try a new material, earth and mud. They sculpted a body and breathed life into it, but these mud people were weak and clumsy. They dissolved in the rain, their faces were lopsided, and they could not turn their heads, and their speech was garbled and meaningless. They could not understand the world or their purpose within it. Seeing this flawed creation, the gods simply washed them away, letting the waters dissolve them back into the earth. Undaunted, the divine artisans tried a third time. This time they chose a stronger substance, wood. They carved the wooden people and brought them to life. At first, this seemed like a success. The wooden people could walk, build houses, and even reproduce. They populated the world, but they had critical flaws. They possessed no hearts, no minds, and no memories. They could not comprehend the gods, feeling no gratitude or reverence. They forgot the faces of their creators and offered them no prayers or sacrifices. They simply wandered the earth, empty and mechanical, fulfilling no divine purpose. The gods were deeply displeased. They had created a race of ingrates, beings who enjoyed the gift of life but offered nothing in return. This failure could not stand. The gods convened and decided on a definitive punishment. They would unleash their wrath upon the wooden people, and the instrument of that wrath was Huracan. The sky darkened as Huracan summoned a great flood, a monumental inundation that rose from the oceans and poured from the skies, but this was no ordinary flood. Along with the water came a torrent of boiling pitch, a sticky, burning resin that rained down from the heavens, scouring the land and destroying everything in its path. The wooden people were battered, drowned, and burned. Their homes and fields were utterly obliterated. To ensure their complete annihilation, the gods sent a host of avengers. Their own pets and cooking implements turned against them. Their grinding stones and cooking pots rose up to crush their heads and smash their faces. Their dogs bit them, and even the very beams of their own houses attacked them. It was a complete and utter uncreation, a systematic dismantling of a failed world. Those few wooden people who somehow survived the flood and the pitch were chased into the forests. It is said they were transformed into monkeys, condemned to forever swing mindlessly through the trees, a perpetual reminder of the hollow, soulless beings they once were. This part of the myth serves as an etiological tale, explaining the origin of monkeys while also delivering a moral lesson. Without a heart for the gods, one is no better than an animal. After this cleansing, the world was once again silent and empty, ready for the final, successful attempt. The gods discovered the perfect substance, maize or corn. They ground white and yellow maize into flour and, mixing it with water, fashioned the first true humans. These corn people were intelligent, pious, and grateful. They could see and understand the world with perfect clarity, and most importantly, they could give thanks to the gods who made them. This is why, in Maya culture, corn is not just a crop, it is the very substance of human life, sacred and sustaining. The myth is deeply intertwined with the Maya's relationship with their environment. Huracan's flood, a mixture of water and fiery pitch, is a powerful allegory for the very real natural disasters that frequently devastated their world. The region is prone to catastrophic hurricanes whose wind and storm surge bring unimaginable destruction. Furthermore, the area is volcanically active. Eruptions would have spewed ash that blackened the sky and rained down hot, burning material, much like the boiling pitch described in the story. The myth rationalizes these terrifying events not as random natural phenomena, but as the calculated, deserved wrath of the gods against a people who failed in their spiritual duties. It reinforces the central importance of reciprocity. The gods provide life and sustenance, and in return, humans must provide worship and offerings. To forget this duty is to invite a cataclysm. The story of Huracan's wrath is therefore a constant cultural reminder to maintain balance and piety, lest the storms return to wash away a world that has once again forgotten how to give thanks. High in the thin air of the Andes, where the sky feels close enough to touch, lies Lake Titicaca, a vast, deep blue expanse revered as the birthplace of the sun and the very cradle of Andean civilization. It is here that the Incan Empire anchored its most profound origin story, a tale of creation, failure, and a purifying flood sent by the supreme creator god Viracocha. Unlike the impulsive anger of Zeus or the frustrated experiments of the Maya gods, Viracocha's deluge was an act of deliberate, almost sorrowful, cosmic housecleaning, a reset aimed at a humanity that had lost its way. Before the time of the Inca, Viracocha had created a first race of giants, sculpting them from stone. These beings were powerful but flawed. They lacked wisdom and lived in a state of idleness and disobedience, failing to honor Viracocha or follow his divine laws. Disappointed with his creation, the god made a fateful decision. He summoned a great flood called Uno Pachacuti, which translates roughly to a turning over of the world or a cataclysm that changes the age. The waters rose from the oceans and poured from the heavens, submerging the entire earth and drowning every last one of the ungrateful giants. The only remnants of this first age were the giant stone statues that can still be found scattered across the landscape today, which the Inca pointed to as petrified evidence of their myth. With the world once again a blank, watery slate, Viracocha emerged from the depths of Lake Titicaca to begin his work anew. This time he chose a more delicate material. He fashioned a new race of humans from clay, painting each group with the distinct clothing and features they would bear, and giving them their specific languages, songs, and agricultural knowledge. He then breathed life into these clay figures and commanded them to travel underground, emerging from sacred caves, springs, and mountains known as pacarinas across the Andes to populate the land. This act established the foundational Incan concept of Ailu, the kinship group that traces its lineage back to a common ancestral place of origin. But the story doesn't end with this second creation. A separate yet deeply connected flood narrative involves the first humans of this new age. In this version, after Viracocha had created his new people, he traveled the land to check on their progress. He found that, much like the giants before them, many had fallen into sin, greed, and laziness. They neglected the gods and their duties to one another. Enraged by this repeat failure, Viracocha decided to punish them. He commanded the sun to withhold its rain, causing a terrible drought that withered the crops. When that failed to correct their behavior, he unleashed a second, devastating flood upon the region. However, this time he showed mercy to two individuals. On a mountain near Lake Titicaca, a man and a woman survived the rising waters by hiding in a sealed box. As the flood subsided, their box came to rest on a peak, and they emerged into a silent, empty world. Some versions say Viracocha himself had instructed them to build this vessel, recognizing their piety amidst the corruption. The god then commanded them to repopulate the Andes, tasking them with building a new and more righteous society. This couple became the progenitors of all the Andean peoples, and their survival directly legitimized the ruling Inca class, who claimed descent from these sacred survivors and thus held a divine mandate to lead. This myth was far more than a simple story for the Inca. It was a powerful tool of state ideology and social control. The narrative reinforced a rigid societal hierarchy. The Sapa Inca, the emperor, was considered the direct living descendant of Viracocha and the original survivors, a demigod whose right to rule was ordained from the very beginning of time. The different groups Viracocha had painted and sent to their specific pack arenas explained and justified the class structure and division of labor within the empire. It was your destiny to be a farmer, a potter, or a warrior because Viracocha had willed it at the moment of your people's emergence from the earth. This divine origin story quelled dissent and fostered unity under Inca rule. Furthermore, the myth instilled a profound and necessary respect for the volatile Andean environment. The flood, Uno Pachacuti, was a reminder that the world could be overturned at any moment by the whim of a displeased god. The Andes are a region of extreme geological drama. Earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and catastrophic flooding from glacial melts are a constant threat. The myth provided a framework for understanding these disasters. They were not random tragedies, but divine corrections for human misbehavior. To prevent another flood, the people had to maintain Aini, a concept of sacred reciprocity and balance. This meant making regular offerings to the earth goddess Pachamama, honoring the mountain spirits or Apus, and living in harmony with the natural world. The entire Incan civilization, with its breathtaking terracing, intricate water management, and meticulous astronomical observations, can be seen as a continuous effort to maintain this balance and appease Viracocha, ensuring he would never again see the need to wash the world clean. Journeying now from the sun-drenched Andes to the misty shores and rolling green hills of the ancient Celtic world, we uncover a flood tradition as deep and mysterious as the peat bogs that preserve its history. While the myths of Greece and Mesopotamia were recorded by scribes, the Celtic peoples, the Gauls, the Britons, the Welsh passed their sacred knowledge down through an intricate oral tradition, guarded by their learned class, the Druids. This makes their surviving flood narratives particularly fascinating. They are fragments of a grander, lost tapestry, whispers of a world that was reshaped by water. The most compelling of these is the Welsh legend of the overflowing of Llyn Llian, the Lake of Waves, a catastrophe that required not an ark but a magical vessel of a different kind. The story is preserved in fragments within the Welsh triads and later medieval texts that drew from much older sources. It tells of a primordial lake named Llyn Llian, a vast inland sea that was said to hold all the waters of the world in a state of precarious balance. Through some cataclysmic event, sometimes attributed to a terrible battle or a divine accident, the banks of this lake burst. The waters did not merely flood, they exploded outward in an unstoppable deluge, swallowing the entire world and killing every living soul upon it. All, that is, except for two individuals, a man named Dwyfan and a woman named Dwyfach. Forewarned of the coming disaster, they managed to survive not by building a wooden boat, but by constructing a Nephid Naf Nephian, a magical, enclosed ship often described as being made of tightly woven wicker or carved from a single sacred oak. In this vessel, they rode out the fury of the flood, and when the waters finally receded, they landed on the pristine, empty shores of what would become the Isle of Britain. From this single couple, the new race of Britons was born, repopulating the land that had been wiped clean. This myth diverges sharply from others we've explored. The cause is not divine punishment for sin, but rather a kind of cosmic plumbing failure, a rupture in the natural order. The vessel itself is not a divinely proportioned ark but a nephid, a word steeped in mystical implication, suggesting a craft of enchantment and secrecy, perfectly aligning with the druidic reverence for the hidden powers of the natural world. The survival of Dwyfyn and Dwyfach feels less like a reward for piety and more like a fortunate accident, a thread of continuity that simply managed not to snap. What gives this myth such profound resonance is its potential link to very real prehistoric events that shaped the British Isles. Following the end of the last ice age around 10,000 years ago, the melting of colossal glaciers caused global sea levels to rise dramatically. But for Britain, a far more dramatic event occurred, the catastrophic flooding of Doggerland. This was a vast, low-lying plain of fertile hills, forests, and river valleys that connected what is now Great Britain to mainland Europe. For millennia, it was home to thriving Mesolithic hunter-gatherer communities. However, as the glaciers retreated, a massive glacial lake in what is now the North Sea, dammed by ice and land, suddenly ruptured. This event, known as the Storegga Slide, was triggered by a submarine landslide off the coast of Norway around 6,200 years ago. It generated a tsunami of unimaginable power that smashed into the coastlines of northern Europe. But the real disaster was slower and more permanent. The rising seas, compounded by this and other geological events, steadily inundated Doggerland. Over centuries, the forests drowned, the hills became islands, and the hunting grounds vanished beneath the waves. People were forced to retreat westward to the higher ground of Britain, watching helplessly as their entire world was swallowed by the sea, until finally, the last vestiges disappeared and the English Channel was formed. The Celtic legend of Llyn Llyon's overflow reads like a poetic, cultural memory of this trauma. The inland lake bursting its banks mirrors the glacial outburst floods that would have been known to earlier peoples, while the scale of the drowning world perfectly matches the loss of Doggerland. The story of Dwyfyn and Dwyfach could be the mythologized account of a single band of survivors who made it to the Welsh coast in their primitive, hide-covered coracle, the only witnesses to the annihilation of their former home. This interpretation transforms the myth from a simple folktale into a powerful echo of a historical diaspora. It was not the whole world that flooded, but their whole world. The Druids, as the keepers of tribal memory, would have preserved this story of origin and catastrophe for generations, encoding the terrifying truth of their ancestors' narrow escape from a drowned land into a foundational myth for the peoples of Britain. It explains their arrival and their deep spiritual connection to the new land they inhabited, a land that itself was once saved from a great flood. While the Celts remembered a lost land beneath the waves, the ancient Persians envisioned a cataclysm of a different sort, one born not of water alone, but of a celestial winter so brutal it would purge the world of imperfection. This story comes to us from the sacred texts of Zoroastrianism, one of the world's oldest continuously practiced religions, founded by the prophet Zarathustra. Their flood narrative is not a singular event of rain, but a pivotal moment in a vast cosmic struggle between the benevolent wisdom of Ahura Mazda and the destructive chaos of Angra Mainyu. At the center of this drama is a legendary king, Jamshid, and a divine instruction to build not an ark but a subterranean fortress. The myth, detailed in the Vendidad of the Avesta, begins with a sobering prophecy. Ahura Mazda, the Lord of Wisdom, appears before the righteous King Jamshid, known for his long and prosperous rule. He reveals a coming catastrophe, a weapon devised by the destructive spirit Angra Mainyu. This would not be a simple flood, but a Moku, a fatal winter accompanied by a great deluge, sent to scourge the world of sin and usher in a new age. This aligns perfectly with the Zoroastrian concept of time as a series of grand cycles, each ending in a purification before a renewal. The flood winter is a necessary reset, a harsh but just cleansing of the spiritual pollution brought by evil into Ahura Mazda's good creation. Rather than instructing the king to build a boat to ride upon the waters, Ahura Mazda gives Jamshid a far more intricate task. He is commanded to construct a vara, a word that translates to an enclosure or a fortress, but one with very specific miraculous properties. This vara was to be a long, subterranean refuge, built in the image of a paradisa, a walled garden, which is the root of our word paradise. Its purpose was to preserve the finest seeds of every kind of plant, the most perfect pairs of every species of animal, and the chosen best of humanity, men and women who lived by the principles of good thoughts, good words, and good deeds. The construction details are fascinating and unique. Ahura Mazda instructs Jamshid to bring the earth to the vara, not the vara to the earth, suggesting an act of creation or assembly rather than conventional building. The vara was to be sealed with a golden ring and illuminated by its own artificial light, as the sun and stars would be hidden during the long winter. Most remarkably, those inside would live for centuries, their lives extended so they could steward the preserved creation through the long age of darkness outside its walls. This was not a short voyage, it was a planned, multi-generational hibernation for civilization itself. When Angra Mainyu's fatal winter finally descended, it was as prophesied. A fierce, destructive snow fell, and the world was gripped by an icy cold. The waters that followed were not merely rain, but the thaw from this immense glacial event, a torrential melt that flooded the valleys. But deep within the earth, inside the sealed vara, the chosen people and the perfect specimens of life were safe. They lived in their illuminated paradise, protected from the chaos and corruption raging outside, preserving the blueprint of a perfect world until the time came to emerge and repopulate the cleansed earth. This myth is a profound expression of core Zoroastrian beliefs. The stark dualism between the creative force of Ahura Mazda and the destructive force of Angra Mainyu is front and center. The catastrophe is not a whim but a calculated move in a cosmic war, and the vara is Ahura Mazda's strategic countermove to ensure good ultimately prevails. It also emphasizes the human role in this struggle. Jamshid is not a passive recipient of salvation. He is an active participant who must exercise his free will to choose to follow the divine command and undertake the monumental labor of building the refuge. His righteousness qualifies him for the task, but his effort is essential. The vara itself symbolizes the ideal Zoroastrian community, a sealed, orderly, and righteous society living in a state of grace, protected from the spiritual and physical pollution of the outside world, and dedicated to preserving the best of creation for a brighter future. As we move from the hidden Celtic world and the cosmic winter of Persia, we find another profound narrative of survival, this one emerging from the eastern woodlands of North America. The Lenape people, part of the larger Algonquian language family whose ancestral lands stretched from what is now New York through New Jersey and Delaware, carried a creation story that begins with a vast primordial ocean. In this emptiness lived many powerful spirits and animals, but the world as we know it did not yet exist. The myth tells of a great and sacred turtle, whose broad shell floated upon the endless waters, and on its back the first ancestors lived in a simple, peaceful existence. But this harmony was shattered. The reasons vary in different tellings. Sometimes it was due to the actions of a powerful, disruptive being, or perhaps the people themselves had grown corrupt and forgotten the ways of balance. Their actions angered the Great Spirit, the creator force known as Kishalamakhank. In his righteous displeasure, he decided that this flawed world must be cleansed. He summoned a terrible and relentless rain, a deluge that rose from the depths and fell from the skies until the waters covered even the highest points of the turtle's shell. The world was drowned, and all life upon it was washed away into the churning darkness. Yet the story does not end in total annihilation. High above the flood, in the spirit realm of the 12th heaven, the Great Spirit looked down and took pity. He saw that not all were beyond redemption. He allowed a single representative of the first people, a man or sometimes a group of ancestors, to survive by floating on the surface or by being guided to safety. In many versions, it is the turtle itself, the foundation of the world, that survives, a steadfast island of life in the watery void. But the turtle's back was now barren, stripped bare by the flood, and a new world needed to be built. This is where the story takes its most beautiful and celebrated turn. The survivors, standing on the turtle's shell, knew they needed Earth to begin again. But the mud lay far, far below, at the very bottom of the deep, dark ocean. One by one, the animals volunteered to dive down and bring some back. The loon, a powerful diver, plunged into the depths but returned gasping for air, unable to reach the bottom. The sleek otter tried next, using all its strength to swim downward, but it too failed, surfacing exhausted and empty-handed. The beaver, known for its determination, made a valiant attempt, staying under for a long, long time, but it also returned with nothing to show for its effort. Hope began to fade. Then the humble muskrat stepped forward. The other animals were skeptical. The muskrat was small and not known as a great swimmer like the others. But the muskrat possessed a courage and a spirit of self-sacrifice that outweighed its size. It declared that it would try, even if it cost its life. The muskrat dove into the cold, dark water and disappeared. The survivors waited. A day passed and then another. Just as they had given up all hope, a small bubble rose to the surface and the lifeless body of the muskrat floated up. In its tiny paw, held tight even in death, was a single grain of mud. This speck of earth, retrieved through ultimate sacrifice, was given to the survivors. They placed it on the center of the turtle's shell. Through the power of the Great Spirit and through the songs and ceremonies of the people, that single grain began to grow. It expanded outward in all directions, transforming the turtle's back into a vast, fertile land, the continent of North America itself, which is why many northeastern native nations refer to it as Turtle Island to this day. The muskrat was revived, honored forever as the hero who made the new world possible. From that mud, the Lenape people were recreated, entrusted with the responsibility to live in right relationship with this land that was born from courage and sacrifice. The symbolism here is incredibly rich and speaks directly to Lenape values. The flood is not merely a punishment, it is a necessary correction, a restoration of balance that had been lost. The world is not saved by a god in a boat, but through the cooperative effort of all creatures, each playing its part, with the smallest and seemingly weakest among them making the greatest contribution. The muskrat's dive is the ultimate act of generosity for the greater good, a core principle in many Native American philosophies. The myth establishes a sacred covenant. The people belong to the land, which itself is a living being, the turtle, and they have a duty to protect it, just as the animals protected them. It is a story that doesn't just explain the world's origin, it provides a continuous moral guide for how to live within it. Our journey now takes us to the cold, clear lakes and deep, whispering pine forests of Finland, a land where epic poetry and shamanic magic are woven into the very fabric of the landscape. Here, the national epic, the Kalevala, compiled by Elias Lönnrot in the 19th century from ancient oral traditions, presents a flood story unlike any other. This is not a tale of divine punishment or cosmic renewal, but a catastrophic accident born from a reckless act of vanity, a magical duel that goes horribly wrong and literally plunges the world into chaos. At the heart of this drama are two powerful figures, the ancient, wise sage Väinämöinen and the arrogant young Joukahainen. The story begins with a confrontation. Joukahainen, a brash and overconfident young man, is traveling when he encounters the venerable Väinämöinen, the first and greatest of all sorcerers and an eternal sage who has been alive since the world's creation. Blinded by youthful pride, Joukahainen challenges the old master to a contest of knowledge and magical prowess, boasting that he is the greater man. Väinämöinen, weary of such foolishness, warns him to stand aside, but Joukahainen will not be deterred. He insists on a singing duel, a battle of wisdom and powerful incantations where the truth and power of one's words manifest in reality. Joukahainen begins to sing, but his knowledge is shallow, his spells weak and filled with boasts and falsehoods. In response, Väinämöinen unleashes the full depth of his ancient wisdom. He sings with a power that bends reality itself, his words so potent and true that they physically overwhelm the young upstart. Väinämöinen's magic sinks Joukahainen's own body into the earth. He sinks into a swamp, first to his waist, then to his armpits, as the very marsh swallows him whole. Realizing he is facing utter annihilation, Joukahainen, in a desperate bid to save his own life, offers a series of increasingly valuable bribes: his fine arrows, his decorated bow, even his prized horses and his wealth. But Väinämöinen is unmoved. Finally, in a moment of terrified inspiration, Joukahainen offers the one thing he thinks the old sage cannot refuse: his own sister, the beautiful maiden Aino, as a wife. This catches Väinämöinen's attention, and he agrees to release the boy from the swamp. But in his haste to seal the deal and free himself, Joukahainen commits a catastrophic error. As he reverses his spells to extricate himself, his reckless magic rips a hole in the cosmic order. He accidentally sings up a monstrous, powerful fir tree from the earth and calls a terrible ox from the waters, but his control is sloppy, his intent chaotic. The precise misstep is glorious in its strangeness. In some versions, his chaotic spells cause a great torrent of water to gush forth from the ground. In others, he shatters a celestial horse's hame, a piece of harness whose fragments fall to earth with devastating force. However it happens, the result is the same. A cataclysmic deluge is unleashed, pouring not from the sky, but from the broken earth and the disrupted heavens simultaneously. The floodwaters rise with terrifying speed, swallowing the forests, hills, and everything in between. It is a flood born not of anger, but of incompetence, a magical miscast with global consequences. Väinämöinen, for all his power, is not exempt from this disaster. He too is forced to flee the rising waters. He climbs into a peculiar vessel and sails the flooded world, not as a chosen survivor, but as a refugee of a catastrophe he himself inadvertently caused by accepting the foolish bargain. After sailing for days, he eventually arrives on a barren, unfamiliar shore. This is not a mountaintop, but a unique and featureless land. The world has been wiped clean, but not destroyed. It has been returned to a primordial, watery state, ready for a new act of creation. And it is here that the story takes its most famous turn. As Väinämöinen explores this new, empty world, he spots a solitary bird, a teal or a goldeneye soaring over the waters. The duck, searching for a place to land and nest, finds none. Moved by compassion or perhaps a shaman's understanding of the natural order, Väinämöinen assists in the creation process. He raises his knee above the water, providing a makeshift perch for the exhausted bird. The grateful duck lands on his knee and in time lays a single magnificent egg. But the duck, unsettled by the movement of the water or the sage leg, suddenly takes flight, causing the egg to roll off its perch and shatter on the waters below. What might seem like a second catastrophe becomes the moment of creation itself. The pieces of the broken egg transform into the physical world. The yolk rises to become the radiant, life-giving sun. The white of the egg spreads out to form the glowing, silvery moon. The scattered speckles of the shell become the stars dotting the night sky. Even the darker fragments find their purpose, transforming into the clouds in the heavens. And the larger pieces of the eggshell, they sink beneath the waters to become the very foundation of the earth, the solid ground upon which all life will walk. Väinämöinen himself then sets about carving the capes, bays, and shores of this new world, finalizing the geography born from the duck's egg. This myth is a profound expression of the Finno-Ugric shamanic worldview. The flood is not a moral judgment but a rebalancing, a return to a fluid state where the world can be resung into existence. The entire narrative is powered by the belief in the potency of words and song. Reality is literally composed and decomposed by the power of incantation. Väinämöinen is the ultimate shaman, a figure who can interact with the spirit of the duck and participate directly in the ordering of the cosmos. The image of the world forming from a bird's egg is a powerful symbol of life emerging from a small, contained source, a concept found in many northern Eurasian cultures. Geographically, the story is deeply tied to the experience of the peoples living around the Baltic Sea. This is a region massively shaped by post-glacial rebound. The land is still rising today, freed from the immense weight of Ice Age glaciers. What was once submerged under ancient seas is now dry land. The myth of a world emerging from the waters is a poetic interpretation of this very real, ongoing geological process. The story of Väinämöinen and the duck's egg is not just a myth about a flood. It is a story about the continuous, participatory creation of the world, where wisdom, folly, and the simple act of a bird laying an egg are all part of the same delicate, magical, and ever-unfolding song. Crossing the vast Atlantic, we find another profound story of divine judgment and rebirth, this one emerging from the rich spiritual soil of West Africa. The Yoruba people of what is now Nigeria and Benin possess one of the world's most complex and influential mythological systems, and their flood narrative is deeply woven into their very understanding of creation and moral order. This is the story of Olorun's judgment, a celestial intervention that reshaped the world and established the sacred roles of its most important deities. In the beginning, the world was a marshy, watery wilderness, a place of potential waiting to be given form. The supreme creator god, Olorun, the owner of the sky, looked down upon this primordial swamp and decided it was time for solid land to emerge and for humanity to have a proper home. He tasked Obatala, the god of purity, creativity, and white cloth, with this momentous undertaking. Olorun gave Obatala a snail's shell filled with sacred earth, a golden chain, and a 5-toed chicken. His instructions were clear: descend from the heavens on the chain and pour the earth upon the waters to create the land. Obatala began his descent, but the journey was long. Partway down, he grew weary and decided to rest. To pass the time, he began to drink from a calabash of palm wine, becoming intoxicated. In this inebriated state, he grew careless and clumsy. He stumbled, spilling some of the sacred earth and falling asleep before his task was complete. High above, Olorun saw that the work had stalled. He could not allow creation to remain unfinished, so he turned to Ojujuwa, another powerful Orisha known for their strength and determination. Olorun handed the remaining sacred earth and the chicken to Ojujuwa and commanded them to finish the job. Ojujuwa descended the golden chain, found the sleeping Obatala, and carefully stepped over him onto the watery chaos below. There, Ojujuwa poured the sacred soil onto the marsh and placed the 5-toed chicken upon it. The chicken began to scratch and scatter the earth, spreading it outward in all directions until it formed a wide, solid tract of land, which became known as Isle Ife, the sacred city and the cradle of Yoruba civilization. When Obatala awoke, sober and filled with shame, he saw the completed work and was overcome with remorse for his failure. Olorun, in his wisdom, forgave Obatala but appointed Ojujuwa as the first divine ruler of the new land, the Uni of Ife, establishing a lineage that continues to this day. This initial tension between the two Orishas explains their enduring roles. Obatala as the creator of human bodies and the patron of those born with differences, and Ojujuwa as the founder of kingship and political order. This act of creation set the stage for the flood. Humanity flourished on the land, but over many generations they began to stray from the path of righteousness. They became consumed by greed, jealousy, and violence. They forgot their duties to one another, and most importantly, they forgot to honor the Orishas and Oloran himself. The world was filled with noise, not of industry but of sin. The cosmic balance was shattered. Oloran looked down upon his creation and saw that it had become corrupted beyond repair. Just as he had once sent the waters to recede to create land, he would now send them back to cleanse it. Oloran decided to unleash a great flood, a deluge from the heavens that would wash the earth clean of its corruption. But he was not without mercy. Remembering the contributions of both Obatala and Ojujuwa, he chose to spare them. He instructed the righteous couple to gather their followers and seek refuge on the highest peak they could find. As the rains began and the waters rose, swallowing the cities and forests, Ojujuwa and Obatala led their people to safety. They watched as the world they knew vanished beneath the churning waves, a divine reset for a civilization that had lost its way. When the waters finally receded, Ojujuwa, Obatala, and their followers descended from the mountain. They found the land renewed, fertile, and empty. They became the progenitors of a new, more righteous humanity, tasked with building a society that would forever remember the consequences of forgetting the gods. This myth reinforces a core tenet of Yoruba belief: the necessity of living in alignment with divine will, or As, and maintaining balance through ritual, ethics, and respect for the Orishas. The impact of this narrative extends far beyond Nigeria. During the transatlantic slave trade, millions of Yoruba people were forcibly brought to the Americas. They carried their beliefs with them, and in the crucible of slavery, they preserved their stories by syncretizing them with the Catholicism of their oppressors. This gave birth to powerful diaspora religions like Santeria in Cuba, Candomblé in Brazil, and Vodou in Haiti. In these traditions, the core of the flood myth was maintained. Oloran, the distant supreme god, is often syncretized with the Christian God the Father. Obatala, the pure creator, is frequently associated with Our Lady of Mercy or Jesus Christ, while Ojujuwa's strong, ruling nature connects to figures like Saint Christopher. This means the story of the flood and the righteous survivors is still told today, from Havana to Salvador da Bahia. It serves the same purpose. It is a moral compass, a reminder of a covenant between the divine and the human, and a story of hope that even after the most catastrophic cleansing, a righteous remnant can begin again. The Yoruba flood myth is not a relic. It is a living, breathing narrative that survived the Middle Passage and continues to guide the spiritual lives of millions, a testament to the resilience of culture and the universal human need to find meaning in the waters that both give and take life. Leaving behind the sacred lands of the Yoruba, our journey now carries us across the greatest ocean on Earth to a world of endless blue and scattered emerald islands. For the Polynesian peoples, the ocean was not a barrier but a pathway, a vast realm teeming with life, danger, and divine power. Their flood narratives are not tales of global punishment but of creation and consequence, intimately tied to the very formation of their island homes. At the center of these stories stands the great trickster and culture hero, the demigod Maui, whose incredible feats of strength and cunning often reshape the world, sometimes with unintended and deluging results. The most famous of these feats is the legend of how Maui fished up the islands. In the Maori tradition of Aotearoa or New Zealand, the North Island is known as Te Ika e Moe, the fish of Maui. The story begins with Maui, the youngest and cleverest of his brothers, who are all skilled fishermen. Yet they always left him behind, considering him too small and weak to be of any use. Tired of their dismissive treatment, Maui hid in the hull of their great canoe one day. Once they were far out to sea, beyond sight of any land, he revealed himself. His brothers were furious, but it was too late to turn back. Maui, however, had a plan. He had brought with him a magical fishhook carved from the jawbone of his sorceress grandmother. This hook, named Manaiakalani, was imbued with tremendous power. Maui baited the hook with blood from his own nose, a powerful offering, and cast the enchanted line deep into the ocean abyss. He chanted powerful karakia or prayers as he let the line run. The hook sank down until it caught on something immense below the waves. Maui heaved on the line and with his superhuman strength began to pull. A great struggle ensued and the sea began to boil and churn. His brothers, forgetting their anger in the face of this miracle, added their strength to the effort, pulling on the great fish. Slowly, a colossal shape began to break the surface of the water, a massive fish the size of a continent. This was the land that would become Te Ika a Moe. Maui cautioned his brothers to wait, to let the great fish settle, and for him to make the proper offerings to the gods to thank them for this gift. But the brothers, overcome with excitement and greed, ignored him. They rushed forward onto the still soft, trembling land with their weapons, arguing over who would claim which part. They began to hack and cut at the fish, carving its flesh into the valleys, mountains, and gorges that define the North Island's rugged landscape today. This act of sacrilege and impatience had a dire consequence. The great fish, in its agony, thrashed and convulsed. Its violent movements, combined with the disturbance of pulling such a mass from the ocean floor, triggered a catastrophic tsunami. A colossal wave, a wall of water born from the fish's death throes, rose up and swept across the newly formed land, threatening to wash everything and everyone away. It was a flood of creation's pain, a direct result of humanity's failure to show respect and follow sacred protocol. Maui, the hero, became the unwitting cause of a deluge. In some traditions, this flood is what separated the islands and created Cook Strait, and it serves as an eternal lesson about the importance of patience, reverence, and the profound interconnectedness of actions and their environmental repercussions. This core narrative echoes across the Polynesian triangle, adapting to the unique geography of each archipelago. In the Hawaiian version, Maui is similarly trying to earn the respect of his brothers. When he fishes up the islands, his catch is not one fish but several, each becoming one of the main Hawaiian islands. The thrashing of these giant fish and the subsequent churning of the sea is used to explain the powerful, unpredictable ocean currents that surround the islands, currents that could easily swamp a voyaging canoe. The myth provided a spiritual explanation for very real and dangerous nautical phenomena, teaching new navigators to respect the ocean's might, which could be stirred up by the actions of the gods. In Tahiti, the story takes on an even more volatile character, linking Maui's fishing exploit directly to the island's volcanic origins. Here, Maui's line is said to have snagged not on a fish, but on the roof of the underworld house of the god of earthquakes, Ruahatu. In his anger at being disturbed, Ruahatu shook the very foundations of the earth, causing the land to rise but also triggering massive earthquakes and tsunamis that flooded the coastlines. This variant brilliantly explains the region's intense seismic and volcanic activity. The islands were not merely fished up, they were born from a geological struggle between a demigod and an earth deity, and the resulting floods and eruptions were a permanent feature of this volatile creation. Ultimately, these stories are far more than entertaining fables. For the Polynesians, the world's greatest navigators who crossed thousands of miles of open ocean using only the stars, waves, and winds as guides, these myths were vital cultural maps. They encoded crucial information about the environment. The story of the flood caused by Maui's brothers explained why the land was so mountainous and why the seas could be so treacherously rough. It taught lessons about social order, the importance of listening to spiritual leaders, and the catastrophic results of greed and impatience. Every mountain was a scale of the fish, every valley a cut from a brother's adze, and every powerful wave a reminder of the ocean's primordial power that could both give life and take it away. Maui's flood is a creation story that never really ended. The relationship between the land, the sea, and the people remains dynamic and sacred. A continuous dialogue where a moment of disrespect could, the myths warn, once again stir the waters into a devastating fury. Now we venture to the islands of Japan, where creation and catastrophe are not separate events, but two sides of the same sacred coin. The ancient Shinto tradition, as recorded in the 8th century text the Kojiki, presents a flood narrative that is intimately tied to the very birth of the nation itself. This is not a story of a world-drowning punishment, but of a primordial, creative act that carries within it the seeds of both life and necessary purification. Our guides are the divine couple Izanagi and Izanami, whose names mean the male who invites and the female who invites. In the beginning, the world was a floating, oily, chaotic mass, drifting like a jellyfish upon the primeval sea. The younger generations of gods born from the first deities looked upon this formless chaos and commanded Izanagi and Izanami to descend from the high plane of heaven and give it solid form. To aid them in this monumental task, the gods bestowed upon the couple a magnificent jeweled spear named Aim Nonuboko, the heavenly spear, standing upon the floating bridge of heaven which connected the celestial realm to the chaos below. They dipped the tip of the spear into the briny, swirling waters and began to stir. As they lifted the spear, drops of brine fell from its tip. Those drops coalesced and solidified, forming the first island, Onagoro-shima, the self-curdling island. The couple descended to this newly formed land, erected a great pillar, and performed a ritual of marriage circling the pillar from opposite directions. From their union, they gave birth to the 8 main islands of Japan and a host of other deities. However, their creative act was tragically interrupted. While giving birth to the fire god Kagetsuchi, Izanami was severely burned and descended into the land of Yomi, the underworld, a place of profound pollution and defilement in Shinto belief. A grief-stricken Izanagi, breaking a strict taboo, journeyed to retrieve her, but he found her body already decomposing, inhabited by maggots and thunder gods. Horrified by this vision of death and impurity, he fled. A humiliated and enraged Izanami, along with the hags of Yomi, pursued him. In a desperate escape, Izanagi blocked the entrance to the underworld with a massive boulder, permanently separating the world of the living from the world of the dead. Having been to the polluted land of Yomi, Izanagi himself was now spiritually contaminated. His return to the world of the living necessitated a great act of cleansing. He journeyed to a river mouth and performed the first ritual purification, or misogi. As he immersed himself in the water and washed away the filth of the underworld, each impurity that fell from his body transformed into a new deity. Most importantly, from washing his left eye was born Amaterasu, the radiant sun goddess and progenitor of the imperial line. From his right eye came Tsukuyomi, the moon god, and from his nose sprang Susanoo, the volatile storm god. This is where the concept of the flood enters the Japanese consciousness. The immense volume of water used in this divine misogi is itself a purifying deluge. But the story continues with Susanoo, his wild and destructive behavior ruining his sister Amaterasu's rice fields, flaying a heavenly pony, and throwing it into her weaving hall caused her to retreat into a cave, plunging the world into darkness. The gods eventually coaxed her out, restoring light, but they punished Susanoo by expelling him from heaven. It is Susanoo's subsequent actions on earth that most directly tie to flood mythology. After slaying the 8-headed serpent Yamata no Orochi, he discovered the sacred sword Kusanagi within its tail. But his tumultuous nature often brought chaos and, metaphorically, destructive storms and flooding to the land he walked. His actions represent the untamed, violent aspect of nature that must be ritually appeased and brought back into balance. The Japanese flood narrative is thus a continuous process of purification rather than a single cataclysmic event. The waters that created the islands are the same waters that cleanse impurity. This is the core of Shinto belief. The world is inherently sacred, but it can be polluted by contact with death, blood, and spiritual corruption. These pollutions, called kegare, must be regularly washed away through ritual and water to restore harmony, or wa. The annual festivals at shrines where Mikos wave sacred tree branches to sprinkle purifying water on worshippers are direct descendants of Izanogi's misogi. This myth provides a spiritual framework for understanding Japan's very real environmental realities. The archipelago is constantly shaped by water, blessed by life-giving monsoon rains and tsunamis, but also threatened by typhoons and devastating floods that regularly reshape the coastline. Instead of seeing these events as divine punishments, the Shinto view interprets them as part of a natural, cyclical process of washing away spiritual grime and renewing the sacredness of the land. The flood is not an end, but a necessary and recurring baptism for the world. While the Greeks, Maya, and Norse envisioned a singular, world-shattering deluge, the ancient Egyptians held a far more haunting and perpetual vision of the flood. For them, the watery abyss was not an event in the past, but the original, ever-present state of non-existence that constantly threatened to reclaim the ordered world. This was the domain of Nun, the personification of the dark, chaotic, primordial waters that existed before the dawn of time itself. In the Egyptian worldview, creation was not a one-time act of forming something from nothing. It was a heroic, ongoing struggle to maintain a fragile bubble of order called Mat within the infinite, suffocating embrace of Nun's chaotic waters. The genesis of everything is described in the Heliopolitan creation myth. Before the first god, before the first moment, there was only Nun, a boundless, motionless, and dark ocean. Within this watery void, the potential for all life lay dormant. Then, through an act of sheer will, the first being emerged from Nun's depths. This was Autumn, the self-created one, who rose onto the first mound of dry land, the Benben stone, which had miraculously emerged from the waters. Autumn then began the process of creation, bringing forth the gods Shu, air, and Tefnut, moisture, who in turn gave birth to Jeb, earth, and Nut, sky. It was this divine family who physically pushed the sky and earth apart, creating the sacred space, the cosmos, where life could flourish. But this cosmos was not floating in empty space. It was quite literally a pocket of air and light surrounded on all sides above, below, and to every horizon by the endless, pressuring waters of Nun. This is where the Egyptian concept of the flood becomes uniquely terrifying. The world was not safe from a flood. It was perpetually in danger of being flooded. Every night, the sun god Ra was believed to sail his bark through the 12 caverns of the underworld, which was not a fiery hell but another part of the subterranean waters of Nun. This journey was a nightly battle for survival. The greatest threat Ra faced was Apep, a gigantic serpent of pure chaos and dissolution who dwelled within Nun's depths. Apep would attack the solar bark, trying to swallow it and plunge the world back into eternal darkness and watery chaos. Ra, protected by other gods like Set, would defeat Apep each night, ensuring the sun would rise again. But the threat was constant. One failure, and the universe would be unmade, swallowed by the primordial waters. This cosmological struggle was mirrored in the very geography of Egypt. Each year, the Nile River would flood its banks, depositing the rich, black silt that made the land fertile. This event, the inundation, was called the arrival of Hapi, and it was a time of both celebration and anxiety. A flood that was too low meant famine and drought. A flood that was too high could wipe out villages and drown the kingdom. The Egyptians saw this annual event as a miniature reenactment of the cosmic struggle. The fertile land emerging from the receding waters was a recreation of the primeval mound, a renewal of life born from the chaotic, life-giving, yet dangerous waters of Nun. The pharaoh's most sacred duty was to maintain Mat, to perform the rituals that ensured the Nile's flood would be just right, and that Ra would defeat Apep, keeping the overwhelming waters of Nun at bay. This fear of cosmic dissolution is powerfully expressed in the funerary texts, most famously in the Book of the Dead. Spells were designed to protect the deceased soul on its own journey through the underworld, a path that mirrored Ra's. The dead had to navigate these same treacherous waters and avoid being consumed by the chaos that lurked within. one spell meant to grant the deceased the power to transform into various creatures to escape dangers includes the plea, "I have not been burned by fire, I have not been drowned in the water," a direct reference to the threats of the elemental chaos. The ultimate goal was to be reunited with Osiris and become an effective spirit, one who existed in a state of perfected order, safe from the ever-lurking, watery void of none. The Egyptian flood myth was therefore not a memory of a past event, but a daily reality and a future fear, a constant reminder that order is precious, temporary, and must be defended by both God and Pharaoh against the silent, waiting, endless deep. For the Chukchi people living along the harsh and frozen shores of the Arctic Ocean, the world itself was born from a deluge of ice and water, a story preserved not in text but in the vibrant threads of oral tradition passed down through countless generations. Their great flood narrative is not one of divine punishment for sin, but a stark tale of survival and adaptation, a reflection of their intimate and respectful relationship with an environment that is both provider and perpetual threat. At the heart of this drama is the trickster creator Raven, a figure of immense power and capriciousness found throughout Arctic mythology. The story begins in a time when the world was different, perhaps warmer, with people living comfortably along the coast. But humanity grew careless. They began to take the abundance of the sea and the land for granted, wasting the animals they hunted and forgetting the rituals of gratitude owed to the spirits of nature. This imbalance angered the natural world, and the signs began to show unusual warmth, unstable ice, and a restlessness among the animals. The spirit Raven, who had helped shape the world and often intervened in human affairs, saw this disrespect. In his anger, or perhaps as a necessary lesson, he decided to send a great cleansing. He did not summon a rainstorm, for rain is rare in the far north. Instead, he called upon the most terrifying force the Chukchi knew, a colossal wave from the Chukchi Sea, combined with a rapid, catastrophic melt of the permafrost and glacial ice. The result was a flood unlike any other. Icy seawater mixed with torrents of meltwater from the land surged inland, swallowing the coastal plains and villages. The people and animals had nowhere to run but toward the few scattered mountain peaks that broke the surface of the rising water. In a desperate scramble for survival, every creature, human, reindeer, walrus, and polar bear, fled together, their ancient rivalries forgotten in the face of shared annihilation. They clung to the barren mountaintops, watching as the world they knew vanished beneath a churning, gray sea littered with blocks of ice. The cold was biting, food was scarce, and hope seemed as distant as the sun during the long polar night. As the waters showed no sign of receding, the survivors faced a grim decision. They could not stay on the exposed mountaintops indefinitely. It was then that the clever muskrat, a creature known for its resilience, made a daring proposal. It would dive down to the bottom of the new sea to see if any land remained. The muskrat plunged into the freezing depths, staying under for so long that the others believed it had perished. But it finally surfaced, gasping for air, and in its paw was a small lump of solid earth, proof that the world below still existed. Raven, witnessing this act of courage and perhaps feeling a measure of pity, then commanded the waters to withdraw. Slowly, the flood receded, draining back into the ocean basin and revealing a new, scarred landscape. The world that emerged was fundamentally changed, and the people had to change with it. The lush coastal plains were gone, replaced by the stark tundra and permafrost that defines the region today. This event forced a dramatic cultural evolution. The Chukchi who survived splintered into two adaptive paths, explaining the two main subgroups that exist to this day. Some groups became the nomadic reindeer herders, the Choku, following the great herds inland across the vast tundra, their entire society and economy built around the mobility and sustenance provided by the reindeer. Others became the sedentary maritime hunters, the Ankalit, who mastered the art of hunting sea mammals like whales and seals from their walrus skin boats, learning to read the moods of the very sea that had tried to destroy them. The flood in this telling was not an end but a brutal catalyst that forged the distinct and highly specialized cultures of the Chukchi people, teaching them the harsh lessons of environmental respect and adaptation that allowed them to thrive in one of the most unforgiving climates on Earth. This myth is a powerful example of oral history preserving a possible geological truth. The region around the Bering Strait and the Chukchi Sea is a landscape that has experienced dramatic transformation since the last ice age. As the massive glaciers retreated, global sea levels rose, but the land itself was also rebounding, freed from the immense weight of the ice. This process, called isostatic rebound, created a complex and changing coastline. Vast areas of land that were once exposed, forming the Bering Land Bridge, were inundated by the rising seas. The Chukchi flood story could very well be a cultural memory of this post-glacial sea level rise, a thousands-year-long event that would have forced human and animal populations to continually retreat and adapt to a shrinking homeland. The image of survivors clinging to mountaintops is a perfect metaphor for this slow-motion catastrophe, where the highest points of land became refuges and eventually new coastlines. The story is more than a myth. It is a deep-time testimony to human resilience encoded in narrative form and passed down through the ages around Arctic campfires, a constant reminder that the land and sea are never truly still. Venturing now into the highlands of the Caucasus, we find a flood story that serves as a powerful declaration of national identity, a narrative of defiance forged in the fires, or rather, the waters of ancient conflict. The Armenian tradition surrounding the patriarch Hae is a fascinating tapestry woven from both indigenous legend and threads borrowed from its powerful Mesopotamian neighbors, yet it is reworked into something entirely unique and fiercely Armenian. This is not a story of humanity's failure, but of one nation's heroic origin, born from a flood sent by a tyrant and survived by a freedom-loving hero. The epicenter of this myth is the struggle between Hae, considered the forefather of the Armenian people, and the Babylonian titan Bel. In the Armenian telling, Bel is not merely a god but an ambitious and oppressive ruler who sought to dominate all the descendants of Noah following the Great Flood. He claimed lordship over the world and demanded tribute and subservience from all peoples. Hae, a mighty archer and a proud leader of his clan, refused to bow. He saw Bel not as a legitimate sovereign but as a monstrous giant, a usurper of freedom. This refusal sparked a bitter enmity. Hae, choosing liberty over servitude, gathered his extended family and followers and led a great migration northward, away from the oppressive power of Babel, into the rugged mountains of what would become the Armenian homeland. Enraged by this act of defiance, Bel raised a massive army and pursued Hae, determined to crush this rebellion and make an example of him. As Bel's forces marched, the Titan wielded not just military might but divine power. To impede Hae's progress and punish his insolence, Bel unleashed a great flood upon the land, aiming to drown the patriarch and his people as they traveled. This deluge mirrors the Mesopotamian archetype, a tool of divine wrath used by a powerful deity against those who displease him. But Hae, a figure of immense resilience, guided his people through the cataclysm. They sought refuge on the slopes of the towering mountains that characterize the region, their ark being the high ground itself rather than a built boat. They survived the rising waters, their spirit unbroken. The conflict culminated not in a watery grave, but on the slopes of a mountain near a great lake. As Bel's army closed in, Hae made a stand. The two forces met in a colossal battle. The legend tells that Hae, seeing Bel leading his troops from the front, took up his legendary bow. He fired a single, unerring arrow, a shot guided by the rightness of his cause that struck the Titan in the chest, piercing his armor and killing him instantly. With their leader slain, Bel's army fell into disarray and was utterly defeated. The spot where the Titan fell was named Gerazman, meaning graves, and the nearby lake was called Hae in honor of the great patriarch. This victory was far more than a military triumph. It was a moment of genesis. On that land, saved from the flood and defended in battle, Hae founded his nation, which his descendants called Haeston, the land of Hae, a name Armenians use for their country to this day. His sons and grandsons went on to establish the principal dynasties and regions of ancient Armenia, creating a distinct cultural and political entity separate from the Mesopotamian world. The flood, in this context, becomes a foundational trial. It is the obstacle that the Proto-Armenians had to overcome to reach their promised land and earn their right to self-determination. It cleansed the path for their new beginning, washing away the old ties to Babylon and setting the stage for their heroic stand. The Babylonian influence is undeniable and profound. The figure of Bel is a direct appropriation of the Mesopotamian god Marduk, also known as Bel, the head of the Babylonian pantheon and the hero of the Enuma Elish creation epic. Hae himself is often linguistically and narratively linked to the figure of Hae, a minor Sumerian god of grain and scribble arts, but the Armenians transformed these borrowed elements into something entirely their own. They took the regional archetype of the flood and the powerful god-king and turned it on its head. In the Armenian narrative, the sender of the flood is not a justified sovereign punishing a sinful humanity, but the villain of the story. The survivor is not a passive recipient of divine mercy like Utnapishtim, but an active rebel whose courage and skill defeat the divine oppressor. This story served a crucial national purpose. It provided a glorious and ancient origin for the Armenian people that predated and resisted the influence of every subsequent empire, Persian, Roman, Byzantine, or Ottoman, that would seek to dominate them. It is a myth that has sustained a national identity for millennia, a story that says their nation was not founded by an act of submission, but by an arrow of freedom shot straight into the heart of tyranny. From the frozen Arctic to the sun-drenched islands of the Philippines, the thread of flood mythology weaves its way into the very soul of a culture, and the Lumad people of Mindanao offer a narrative deeply rooted in the rhythm of their land and the power of their beliefs. Unlike the world-ending cataclysms of other traditions, the Lumad flood stories are often framed as a divine test, a necessary recalibration ordered by Magbabea, the supreme deity and creator, to address a specific imbalance in the human world. The cause is rarely one of pure annihilation. Instead, it is a response to humanity forgetting the sacred laws of nature, becoming greedy, or failing to maintain the crucial harmony between the people, the spirits, and the environment. In one widespread version of the myth, the people had grown arrogant and wasteful. They cut down immense forests without performing the proper rituals to ask permission from the spirit guardians of the land, the Duwata. They hunted more animals than they could possibly need, leaving carcasses to rot. They quarreled incessantly with one another, breaking the bonds of community. Their noise and disrespect reached the realm of Magbabea, who observed the growing disorder with great disappointment. Seeking to cleanse the land and offer a chance for a more righteous people to emerge, the deity summoned a great wave from the sea, but not before ensuring a warning would be delivered to those who still lived with respect. This warning often came through dreams or through the behavior of animals, interpreted by a community shaman, the Balan. A series of strange omens might appear. Ants would carry their eggs to higher ground. Birds would cease their singing and flee inland. The sea would recede much farther than usual, revealing land normally hidden beneath the waves. Those who heeded these signs, typically a single righteous family or a small group who had maintained their piety, knew to prepare. Their salvation vessel was not a grand, sealed ark, but a practical and readily available creation from their environment. A massive raft woven from the resilient and buoyant bamboo that thrives across the Philippine archipelago. The imagery of the bamboo raft is profoundly significant. It speaks to a culture deeply familiar with the sea and the necessity of adaptation. Bamboo is strong, flexible, and grows in abundance. It represents resilience and a resourcefulness born from the land itself. As the Great Wave, or a series of colossal waves, crashed over the coastal plains and swept through the valleys, the raft became their tiny, floating world. They would have ridden the terrifying surge not for 40 days and nights, but perhaps for a duration tied to the lunar cycle or the passing of a typhoon's fury, until the waters receded and their craft came to rest on a mountaintop, now transformed into an island. Upon disembarking, the survivors found a world washed clean. The corruption and chaos had been literally scoured away. Their first act was never one of mere survival, but one of gratitude. They would immediately perform a ritual, a pagdiwata, to give thanks to Magbabaya for their deliverance and to appease any spirits that might still be angered. They would make offerings of rice, betel nut, and perhaps a sacrificed chicken, seeking a blessing for this new beginning. From this single family or small group, the new Lumad lineages were born, forever instilled with the memory of the flood and the sacred duty to live in balance. This story is performed in their epic chants, the Gud of the Higayonan people or the Ulujing of the Bukidnon, ensuring each new generation understands the consequences of breaking taboos and the importance of heeding the wisdom of nature's signs. The myth is a direct reflection of their environment. The Philippines lies directly in the path of the typhoon belt, and Mindanao, while less frequently struck than the northern islands, is still vulnerable to colossal storms and the storm surges they bring. The legend of the Great Wave is a cultural memory of these devastating events, a framework for understanding the terrifying and seemingly random power of nature. It provides a moral and spiritual cause for a physical phenomenon, transforming a natural disaster into a meaningful, if severe, lesson. Furthermore, the story reinforces the core animist and polytheistic beliefs of the Lumad. The world is alive with spirits in the rivers, the trees, and the mountains. To mistreat the environment is to insult these beings directly, and the flood is the ultimate consequence of that disrespect. The myth is not just a tale from the past, it is a continuous guide for living, a reminder that survival depends on maintaining a respectful dialogue with the powerful, sentient world all around them. Now we travel to the very top of the world, to the vast, icy expanse of Greenland, where survival is a delicate dance on the frozen sea. Here, the Inuit understanding of the flood is not a singular, world-ending event from a distant past, but a constant, imminent threat born from the raw, emotional power of the most important deity in their spiritual world, Sedna, the mother of the sea. Her story is one of profound trauma, betrayal, and a rage so potent it can and does reshape the very elements upon which all life depends. In a landscape where the ocean is both pantry and grave, her moods are the difference between life and death. The myth of Sedna's origin is a harrowing tale of betrayal that explains her eternal wrath. There are many variations, but the core narrative remains heartbreakingly consistent. She was once a beautiful young woman, known for her fierce independence and her refusal to marry any of the hunters who sought her hand. Her father, a widower, lived with her, dependent on her skills for survival. One day, a mysterious fulmar, a seabird, appeared to her. In the form of a handsome stranger, he promised her a life of ease in his warm tent far across the sea, where she would never want for furs or food. Sedna, perhaps yearning for a different life, agreed and left with him, but the promise was a cruel lie. When they arrived at his desolate cliffside nest, she discovered his true form and his true nature. She was a prisoner in a wretched home made of fish skins, fed on raw, foul-smelling fish. She cried out for her father, and a year later he came in his umiak to visit her. Seeing her misery, he killed the fulmar husband and helped Sedna into the boat to flee. But the fulmar's kin discovered the murder and gave chase, summoning a terrible storm to punish the escapees. As the waves threatened to capsize their small boat, the terrified father, in a final act of monstrous cowardice, decided Sedna was the cause of their misfortune and offered her to the sea to save himself. He grabbed his daughter and threw her over the side. She clung desperately to the gunwale of the boat, her frozen fingers gripping the smooth edge. blinded by panic and self-preservation, her father took his hunting knife and hacked at her hands. Some versions say he cut off her fingers at the first knuckle, others say he severed her hands entirely. As her blood stained the water and her severed digits sank into the icy depths, they underwent a miraculous transformation. Each piece of her became a new life: seals, walruses, whales, and all the sea mammals the Inuit depend upon. Sedna herself, mutilated and heavy with despair, sank to the bottom of the ocean, where she became the powerful, terrifying, and eternally grieving goddess of the sea and the ruler of Adlevan, the underworld. This traumatic origin is the key to understanding the Greenlandic flood. Sedna's pain and anger are not abstract concepts, they are palpable forces. When humanity sins, when hunters break taboos, when people are greedy and take more than they need, when they waste food or show disrespect to the animals, their impurities, their moral filth, mats and tangles in Sedna's long, unbraided hair. She cannot comb it herself, for she has no hands. This physical discomfort, this constant reminder of human disrespect, fuels her immense rage, and her anger manifests directly in the world above. She withholds the sea mammals, causing famine, and she stirs the ocean into a furious tempest, sending colossal waves to crash upon the land. The flood here is not a deluge of rain, but a storm surge of divine fury, an attempt to wash the human stain from her realm. The survival of the community hinges not on building an ark, but on spiritual intervention. This is the sacred duty of the Angakok, the shaman. Only they possess the ability to undertake the dangerous spirit journey to the bottom of the sea to appease her. In a deep trance, induced by drumming and chanting within the sacred confines of the igloo or kagik, the shaman's soul descends through the treacherous ocean, past monstrous guardians to reach Sedna's abode. The journey itself is a perilous flood, a navigation of spiritual currents and obstacles. When the Angakok finally arrives, they must perform the most intimate and difficult of tasks. They must gently, reverently comb the tangles from Sedna's hair, removing the source of her irritation. This act of tenderness toward the betrayed goddess is what calms her anger. As the knots are loosened, so is her grip on the animals and her hold on the storms. The seas calm, the game returns, and the threat of a catastrophic flood recedes. This myth is a profound articulation of the Inuit relationship with their extremely fragile environment. It is a system of ecological ethics encoded in narrative form. The story teaches that survival is not a right, but a privilege that must be earned through respect, reciprocity, and ritual. A successful hunt is not just skill and luck, it is a gift from Sedna, and that gift demands gratitude and proper treatment. Wasting any part of a seal or walrus is not just poor practicality, it is a direct insult to the goddess who created it from her own flesh. The ever-present threat of her storms ensures that the community upholds these laws. In a very real sense, the story of Sedna's anger provided a framework for sustainable living and population control in one of the harshest environments on Earth, governing human behavior for millennia. Today, as Greenland faces the very real and accelerating floods of modern climate change, the melting ice sheets and the rising sea levels that threaten their coastal communities, the ancient story of a grieving goddess and the balance she demands feels more resonant and urgent than ever. It is a reminder that some floods are born of nature's cycles, but others are born of a broken relationship with the world around us. Deep in the heart of the Amazon rainforest, where the canopy forms a living cathedral and the air itself hums with life, the Tupi-Guarani peoples tell a story of creation born from celestial sorrow. This narrative doesn't begin with divine anger or cosmic punishment, but with a profound and personal grief experienced by the moon goddess Jasai. She is a central, gentle figure in their cosmology, a luminous being associated with night, plants, fertility, and perhaps most importantly, the delicate balance of all living things. Her tears, not her wrath, would become the catalyst for one of the world's most astonishing geographical features. The myth recounts a time when the world was younger and the great river as we know it did not exist. The people, though living in a land of abundance, had gradually fallen out of harmony with the forest. They hunted with disrespect, taking more than they needed and failing to honor the spirits of the animals they killed. They felled great trees without thought for the creatures that called them home, and their hearts grew hard with greed, forgetting the sacred connection between all beings. This growing imbalance cast a shadow over the land, a spiritual dissonance that even the celestial beings could feel. Jasai, looking down from her silver throne in the night sky, witnessed this growing disregard for the world she so loved. She saw the suffering of the animals and the wilting of the plants under the weight of human carelessness. But unlike other deities who might respond with thunderbolts or fire, Jasai's reaction was one of deep, empathetic sadness. She began to weep. Her tears were not the brief shower of a passing sadness. They were a torrent of profound, divine grief. They fell from the heavens as a gentle rain at first, but soon intensified into a relentless, world-altering deluge that continued for countless moons. As the waters rose, swallowing the forest floor and threatening all life, a hero emerged. This was Mara, a powerful shaman and cultural hero who could communicate with the spirits and understand the language of the natural world. He sensed the cause of the flood not as a punishment but as an expression of sorrow. Mara traveled from village to village, not to instruct people to build boats but to urge them to change their ways. He warned them that the flood was a manifestation of Jasai's broken heart, a plea for humanity to remember its place within the great web of life. He taught them the proper rituals of respect for the hunt, the correct ways to harvest from the forest, and the songs of gratitude that must be offered to the spirits. Those who listened to Mara and embraced this wisdom sought refuge not on a mountain, but in the highest branches of the immense samoma trees, the kapoks whose towering canopies became islands of safety. They shared this sanctuary with the jaguars, the monkeys, and the macaws, understanding that survival was a collective endeavor. Finally, seeing that humanity had rediscovered its reverence, Mara performed a great act of shamanic power. He did not stop the tears, but he gave them purpose and direction. Using his knowledge of the land, he channeled the immense volume of Jasai's tears, carving a mighty path through the continent. He guided the waters to flow eastward, scouring out a vast basin and creating a powerful, flowing artery, the Amazon River. As the floodwaters drained into this new river, they left behind a transformed world. The rich, life-giving silt deposited by Jasai's tears became the incredibly fertile foundation for the planet's greatest concentration of biodiversity. Every tear was believed to have carried a seed or a spark of life, explaining the mind-boggling variety of plant and animal species that call the Amazon home. The river itself became a reflection of the moon goddess, a winding, silvery pathway through the green darkness, its tides and flows eternally connected to her cycles. This myth is perhaps one of the most ecologically insightful of all flood narratives. It presents environmental catastrophe not as a vengeful punishment, but as the direct consequence of broken reciprocity and a profound, empathetic sadness from nature itself. The lesson is not one of fear, but of responsibility. The Tupi-Guarani worldview, as expressed in this story, does not place humans above nature or separate from it. We are participants in a delicate, reciprocal relationship. The health of the forest and the mood of the goddess are directly tied to human behavior. The creation of the river is not an end, but a new beginning and a permanent reminder. The abundance of the Amazon is a gift born from sorrow, and it demands in return our utmost respect and care. In an era of deforestation and climate change, this ancient story speaks with startling urgency, suggesting that the tears of the world are already falling, and it is our turn to listen for the wisdom of heroes like Mara. Crossing the sea to the mountainous Korean peninsula, we encounter a flood story that serves not only as a foundational myth, but as a powerful allegory for statecraft and the Confucian ideal of the virtuous ruler. Preserved in the 13th century text the Samguk Yusa, or Memorabilia of the Three Kingdoms. This is the tale of Hae Mosu, the legendary founder of the ancient kingdom of Dongbaeo, and his confrontation with the primal force of a river deity. Here, the flood is not a global reset but a localized test of leadership, a challenge issued by nature itself to see if a man is worthy of founding a nation. The narrative begins with Hae Mosu, a figure of celestial origin often described as the Son of Heaven, who arrives on earth with a divine mandate to establish order and lead a people. He chooses a fertile valley near a great river, a perfect site for his nascent kingdom, and begins to build. However, the local river deity, a powerful spirit known for its volatile temper, views this human incursion as an affront. The deity decides to test this so-called Son of Heaven to see if his virtue matches his ambition. Instead of negotiating or issuing a warning, the spirit unleashes its full fury, causing the river to swell and burst its banks in a devastating flood that threatens to wash away Hae Mosu's dreams and his people along with them. Faced with this aqueous onslaught, Hae Mosu does not pray to a higher god for intervention, nor does he command his people to build an ark for escape. His response is what defines the core of the myth and its deep Confucian values. He immediately recognizes the flood not as a mindless act of nature, but as a deliberate challenge from a conscious spiritual entity. A lesser ruler might respond with force or arrogance, but Hae Mosu understands that true leadership requires humility, wisdom, and a sacrifice for the greater good. He does not see the river deity as an enemy to be defeated, but as a powerful neighbor who must be respected and appeased. In a dramatic act of diplomacy and submission to the natural order, Hae Mosu journeys to the raging riverbank. He stands before the churning waters and makes a staggering offer. He promises to sacrifice himself to the river deity if the waters would only recede and spare his people. This ultimate pledge of selflessness, of valuing the lives of his subjects over his own, is the key that unlocks the conflict. The river deity, witnessing such profound virtue and commitment, is appeased. The deity is not conquered, it is won over. The floodwaters subside not because they are defeated, but because the terms of respect have been met. In some versions of the tale, the deity is so impressed that it not only stops the flood but offers Hae Mosu a beautiful daughter as a wife, symbolizing the sacred marriage between a wise ruler and the land itself, ensuring its fertility and prosperity for his descendants. This resolution is a masterclass in East Asian philosophical thought. The myth powerfully illustrates the Confucian ideal of the ruler's responsibility. A king's mandate is not to dominate nature but to harmonize with it for the benefit of his people. His virtue, his de, is what maintains the balance of the world and ensures natural order. Hae Mosu's willingness to offer his own life is the ultimate expression of this virtue, proving his worthiness not just to his people, but to the very spirits of the land he seeks to rule. Furthermore, the story offers a profound lesson in hydro-management that would have resonated deeply for agricultural societies. It teaches that one cannot simply command a river, one must understand its nature, respect its power, and negotiate with it. This ancient wisdom underpinned the development of sophisticated irrigation and flood control systems throughout Korean history, where engineering projects were often accompanied by rituals and offerings to the local water spirits, acknowledging that technical skill must be paired with spiritual respect to truly keep the waters at bay. The legend of Hae Mosu is therefore far more than an origin story. It is a timeless political and environmental treatise on the qualities of a true leader and the sacred pact between humanity, governance, and the unpredictable, life-giving power of water. And so we arrive at one of the world's greatest epic poems, a monumental work that defines the very soul of Iran, the Shahnameh, or the Book of Kings, penned by the poet Ferdowsi over 1,000 years ago. Within its tens of thousands of verses, which chronicle the history of Persian kingship from the dawn of time to the Arab conquest, lies a flood narrative that is not merely a cataclysm of nature, but a political and moral reset for a corrupted world. This is the story of the tyrant Zahak and the flood his reign unleashes, a tale where the survival of the hero Feridun is a victory for justice itself. The myth begins not with a god but with a man's fatal bargain. Zahak is originally a noble and virtuous prince, but the devil Ahriman, the embodiment of evil in Zoroastrian cosmology, recognizes in him a vessel for chaos. Ahriman appears to Zahak disguised as a charismatic friend and whispers a treacherous idea into his ear: he should kill his own father to seize the throne. Once this patricide is committed, Ahriman reveals his true form and offers a second, even more damning reward for the murder. He kisses Zahak on each shoulder, and from these satanic kisses, 2 serpents sprout. These are not ordinary snakes, they are living manifestations of his evil, his arrogance, and his insatiable hunger. They cannot be cut away, for they instantly grow back. The only way to soothe their constant, painful gnawing is to feed them, and Ahriman advises a horrific diet, the brains of 2 young men each day. Thus begins the 1,000-year reign of Zahak, a period of unimaginable terror and oppression. He becomes the archetypal tyrant, a king whose body is physically monstrous and whose rule is sustained by the daily slaughter of his own subjects. The land is plunged into a deep spiritual darkness. The sacred fire of virtue is extinguished, and the divine concept of Fa, the royal glory and legitimacy that shines from a righteous ruler, utterly deserts him. The world groans under the weight of this injustice, and the natural order is thrown into chaos. It is this profound cosmic imbalance, this reign of terror that perverts the very purpose of kingship, that triggers the divine response. The heavens do not just send a rainstorm, the earth itself weeps. Springs burst forth from the ground in sorrow, rivers overflow their banks in anger, and a great flood rises to cleanse the land of Zahak's vile rule, to wash away the spiritual filth that has accumulated over a millennium. Amidst this deluge of divine retribution, a single thread of hope remains. Before his reign of terror began, Zahak had a prophetic dream foretelling his downfall at the hands of a man named Feridun. In a panic, he ordered the slaughter of all children who might fit this description. But Feridun's pious mother, Faranak, is warned of the danger. To save her infant son, she flees to the remote, lush slopes of Mount Alborz, a place of immense mythical significance in Persian lore, believed to be the navel of the world and a nexus of divine energy. She entrusts her son to a herder there and gives the boy to a magical cow named Barme, whose milk is said to be endowed with supernatural virtues. Feridun suckles from this divine cow, imbibing strength, wisdom, and purity, growing into a man destined for greatness. When the floodwaters rise, swallowing the lowlands and the seats of Zahak's power, Feridun and his mother find refuge on the high slopes of Mount Alborz. Their survival is not an accident, it is a divine endorsement. They are spared not merely to live but to act. The flood recedes, leaving a world scoured clean, ready for a new foundation. Now a man, Feridun learns of Zahak's continuing atrocities and the suffering of the people. His righteous anger is ignited. He forges a unique weapon, a mace whose head is shaped like a cow's head in honor of the foster mother who nourished him. He then descends from the mountain, not with a vast army, but with a small band of followers and the overwhelming mandate of heaven. The people, yearning for liberation, flock to his banner. The subsequent clash is less a battle and more an exorcism. Feridun confronts Zahak in his own palace. He does not immediately kill the tyrant. Instead, he strikes him down with a cow-headed mace and binds him in chains. This is a crucial detail. Zahak is not granted a martyr's death but is imprisoned in a deep cave beneath Mount Damavand, where he remains chained until the end of days, his evil contained but not entirely eradicated. This symbolizes a profound truth. Tyranny can be defeated and imprisoned, but the potential for evil always remains, lurking beneath the surface of the world, requiring eternal vigilance. Feridun's victory is the restoration of Fa. He ascends the throne not as a conqueror but as a liberator and a wise, just king ushering in a golden age. The flood in the Shahnameh is therefore a pivotal moment of transition. It is the mechanism that clears the way for the evil king to be overthrown and the righteous king to take his place. Ferdowsi uses this myth to articulate a very Persian and Zoroastrian-inflected theory of governance. A king's right to rule is contingent upon his virtue and his justice. When he becomes a demonic figure like Zahak, a literal serpent king, he forfeits his divine mandate, and the cosmos itself will conspire to remove him, even if it requires a great flood to do so. This story is a powerful lesson for any ruler: govern with justice or face the catastrophic consequences. The hero Feridun, nourished by the sacred and nurtured in purity, becomes the model for all subsequent Persian kings, a reminder that true power is born not from tyranny, but from a covenant with the divine and the people. In the arid, high desert of the American Southwest, the Hopi people hold a creation story that stands apart from almost all others, not as a singular event, but as a cycle of destruction and emergence. Their narrative describes not one, but multiple worlds, each in turn corrupted and then cleansed by water, forcing humanity to seek refuge in a higher, more spiritually advanced realm. This is the profound journey through the Sipapuni, the sacred emergence whole, a story that maps both a physical migration and a spiritual evolution. The Hopi believe we currently live in the fourth world, known as Tu-Wakachi, or world complete. But to understand this world, one must first know the fate of the three that came before it. The first world, Tukpela, was a place of perfect harmony and initial creation. The people lived in peace with the animals and spoke a single language, but over time they became consumed by materialism and forgot their gratitude to the creator, Teoa, and his nephew, Sotaknang. Their discord and greed so violated the sacred order that Sotaknang's solution was a purification by fire, though some traditions also speak of a great cold. The few people who had remembered their spiritual ways were guided by the wisdom of a being called Moso to seek refuge with the ants surviving deep underground. From the ashes of the first world, the second world, Tokpa, was formed. The survivors emerged into this new land and began to multiply once more. Initially, they prospered, but the old temptations returned. They developed advanced technology and began to trade and barter, but this soon curdled into greed, jealousy, and warfare. They forgot their purpose of worship and instead used their skills for selfish gains and conflict. Seeing this repeated failure, Sotaknang chose a different element for purification: water. He warned the righteous few through the spider woman, Kokyangwuti, and instructed them to hollow out giant reeds. These reeds became their arks, sealing them inside as Sotaknang commanded the oceans to swell and the rains to fall, utterly submerging the second world in a global flood. The reeds, buoyant and protected, floated safely on the churning waters until the deluge subsided. The third world, Kaskaza, was the most complex and advanced, and its fall was the most tragic. The people built great cities and thrived, but they fell into their deepest corruption yet. Social stratification, sorcery, and sexual immorality became rampant. Most critically, a powerful faction, the Popwaktu, or Two-Heart people, arose. These were individuals who possessed not only their own heart but a second, evil heart that gave them great power but compelled them to act with malevolence and manipulate others. The world became so unbalanced, so poisoned by this deep-seated evil, that the Creator had no choice. The purification this time was again a flood, but one of unimaginable force, a cataclysm intended to leave no trace. Again, the Spider Woman gathered the righteous, the one-heart people, and guided them to the tops of the highest mountains, but even these peaks were soon to be swallowed. Their salvation lay not in floating on the water, but in escaping beneath it. This is where the concept of the Sipapuni becomes central. As the waters rose, the Spider-Woman opened a portal in the bottom of a dry lake bed, a passageway leading down and then up into the next world. The people, led by various clan leaders, entered this sacred hole, leaving the flooded third world behind. Their journey through the Sipapuni was not instantaneous. It was a long, arduous migration through a dark, subterranean realm, a period of trial and testing. They were guided by their faith and by spiritual signs from above, moving ever upward toward a new dawn. When they finally emerged into the light of the fourth world, they did so in a specific, sacred place, which many believe to be the Grand Canyon, a geological feature that deeply resonates with the imagery of a great emergence. Their arrival in the fourth world was not a victory march but a solemn covenant. The deity Masor, the caretaker of this world, met them. He was a simple farmer holding a planting stick and a gourd of water. He offered them a choice. They could have the technology and power of the previous world, which had led to their downfall, or they could accept his humble way of life, a life of farming, prayer, and living in balance with the harsh desert. Wisely, they chose the planting stick. Masor then gave them a set of prophetic stone tablets and instructed them to migrate across the land until they found their destined home, the place where they could fulfill their sacred duty to be the stewards of this world and keepers of the balance. This myth is the absolute bedrock of Hopi identity and philosophy. The repeated destructions are not about divine wrath but about natural consequence. When humanity lives out of balance, the world itself becomes unbalanced and must be reset. The Sipapuni represents a rebirth, a chance to learn from the mistakes of the past and strive for a higher spiritual plane. The story also serves as a powerful historical map. The great migration that followed their emergence is not just legend. It is etched into the landscape through hundreds of ancient ruins and petroglyphs that mark the Hopi's journey across the southwest. Each clan has its own migration path, its own stories of places they settled and left behind, all converging on the three primary mesas in northern Arizona where the Hopi reside today. Most strikingly, the myth is deeply prophetic. The Hopi believe the fourth world will also end, and the signs of its culmination are detailed in their teachings. They speak of a time of great technological advancement, which we are clearly in, but warn that if this technology is not used with wisdom and a good heart, it will lead to the same greed and corruption that doomed the previous worlds. The prophecies describe a final purification, after which the truly righteous will emerge into a glorious fifth world. This is not a threat, but a warning and a promise, a continuous call to live a life of humility, community, and profound respect for the natural world, ensuring that when the next test comes, they will be ready to climb through the Sipapuni once more, not out of desperation, but as a natural step in their eternal spiritual journey. Yet another powerful current in this river of global stories flows from the vast plains and deep forests of Eastern Europe, where Slavic mythology presents a flood not as a singular, world-ending event, but as a recurring, almost seasonal consequence of a primal, eternal struggle. Here, the deluge is not sent by a disappointed creator, but is the very collateral damage of a cosmic battle between two opposing divine forces, Perun, the mighty god of thunder, lightning, and law, and Veels, the cunning, chthonic god of the underworld, waters, magic, and cattle. Their conflict is the engine of the Slavic world's dynamism, and the floods are the scars left upon the earth from their divine warfare. The tension between these two gods is fundamental and personal. Perun, often depicted as a warrior with a mighty axe or hammer, rules the sky and the high places. He is order, structure, and the clear, righteous violence of a summer storm. Veels, in contrast, is a shapeshifter, a serpent, a great bear, a master of illusions who rules the watery depths of the underworld, the forests, and the low-lying marshes. He is chaos, potential, trickery, and the fertile, unpredictable dark. The core of their enmity is a classic myth of theft. Veels, in his serpent form, would often creep up into the high world of the sky and steal Perun's divine cattle, or, in some versions, his very children or wife. This was not merely a petty crime, it was a direct assault on the established order, a chaotic intrusion into the celestial realm. Enraged by this transgression, Perun would arm himself with his lightning bolts, which were both weapons and symbols of his indomitable will. He would pursue Veals across the heavens, hurling his fiery bolts at the slithering, elusive god. Veals, for his part, would flee, using his powers to transform and hide, diving into the waters of rivers and lakes or burrowing deep into the earth. It is this frantic flight and the powerful response it triggers that directly causes the floods. Each time one of Perun's lightning bolts misses its mark and strikes the earth, it doesn't just leave a scorched tree, it carves out a new valley or a ravine. More importantly, when Veals, as the god of all subterranean and earthly waters, is forced to flee his hiding places, he unleashes the torrents he commands. As Veals bursts from his caves or is flushed from his riverbeds by Perun's assaults, the waters under the earth are released in a great chaotic surge. This explains the terrifying and sudden flash floods that can swell streams and rivers in an instant after a heavy storm, a phenomenon the ancient Slavs would have known all too well. The most dramatic tales, however, come from Ukraine and southern Russia, where the geography itself is explained by this epic struggle. One widespread story tells of a particularly vicious battle where Perun finally cornered Veals and struck him not with a glancing blow, but with a cataclysmic strike of lightning. The force of the impact was so immense that it carved a colossal chasm into the very bedrock of the land. Veals, mortally wounded and his powers unraveling, flooded this new canyon with all the waters at his command, creating the mighty Dnieper River. In this way, one of Eastern Europe's most important waterways is not a passive feature of the landscape, but a permanent monument to a moment of divine violence. This mythic framework also provides a powerful allegory for the seasonal cycle, deeply resonating with an agricultural society. The battle is not a one-time event but is reenacted every year. During the autumn, as the days grow shorter and the world seems to die, Veals gains the upper hand. His chaotic, watery influence rises, the rains come, the rivers swell, and the earth becomes muddy and dormant. This is the time when Veals is said to rule the world, his power seeping up from the underworld. But this state of watery chaos is not permanent. With the coming of spring, Perun rallies his strength. The first spring thunderstorms are not merely weather, they are Perun launching his counter-offensive, hurling his lightning bolts to once again defeat Veals and drive him back into his subterranean prison. As Veals is defeated and forced to retreat, the floodwaters he unleashed recede, the land dries, and the sun, Perun's domain, returns, allowing for planting and growth. The flood is thus an integral, expected part of a cosmic cycle of death and rebirth, chaos and order, orchestrated by these two opposing but interdependent gods. The world needs both, Veals's fertile, creative chaos and Perun's ordering, destructive power. The flood is the price paid for this eternal balance, a reminder that creation and destruction are two sides of the same coin, forever locked in a dance across the Slavic earth. High in the thin, rarefied air of the Himalayas, where the earth meets the sky in a jagged line of snow and stone, water takes on a sacred and dual nature. It is the source of life for all beings, yet its uncontrolled power can also bring utter devastation in the form of glacial outbursts and violent floods. Tibetan Buddhist tradition holds a unique and profound perspective on these natural forces, viewing them not as random acts of nature, but as manifestations of powerful, often malevolent spiritual energies. And the central figure in taming this chaotic power is the great tantric master Padmasambhava, the lotus-born guru known reverently as Guru Rinpoche. His story is not one of surviving a single past flood, but of an ongoing spiritual conquest, a series of miraculous interventions that literally shaped the spiritual landscape of Tibet and transformed its waters from a threat into a blessing. The narrative begins in the 8th century when the Tibetan king Trisong Detsen sought to firmly establish Buddhism in his land. he invited the great abbot Shantarakshita from India to build the first monastery, Samai. But a series of catastrophic disasters struck. Violent hailstorms destroyed crops, diseases spread among the people, and most ominously, the waters of the nearby Brahmaputra River, known in Tibet as the Yarlung Tsangpo, swelled and flooded, threatening to wash away the entire construction site. Shantarakshita diagnosed the problem not as bad luck but as spiritual opposition. The ancient gods and demons of the Tibetan land, the Lu and Naga spirits who controlled the waters and the earth, were deeply angered by this new foreign doctrine. Their wrath was being expressed through the elements. The abbot advised the king that to pacify these forces, he would need to invite a master of unparalleled tantric power, a wizard of the Dharma who could subdue demons not through force but through enlightened wisdom. That master was Guru Rinpoche. When Padmasambhava arrived from the land of Odayana, he did not come to fight the land, he came to convert it. His method was one of magnificent spiritual diplomacy. He embarked on a pilgrimage across the entire Himalayan region, a journey known as his taming of the borders. Wherever he went, he encountered local deity spirits causing turmoil, droughts here, floods there, avalanches and sickness elsewhere. One of his most famous confrontations involved a powerful Naga king, a serpentine spirit of the watery depths who was holding back the rains, causing drought and famine. In another, he faced a colossal demoness whose sprawling body was said to form the very topography of Tibet, and whose negative energies had to be pinned down by the construction of temples on specific strategic points, much like acupuncture needles calming the body's energy. His approach to flood-causing spirits was particularly ingenious. He would often meditate directly at the source of the trouble, a volatile glacial lake or a raging river confluence. There he would not destroy the demon, but would instead engage it in spiritual combat, ultimately revealing to it the true nature of its own mind. Through the profound practices of Vajrayana Buddhism, he would show the spirit the futility of its anger and the suffering it caused. Having subdued its harmful intent, he would then offer it a new role. He would bind the spirit under a sacred oath, a samaya, to become a dharmapala, a protector of the Buddhist teachings. In exchange for this elevated position, the spirit would vow to use its power not for destruction, but to safeguard the land and its people. The destructive potential of the water was not eliminated, it was redirected and sanctified. The physical evidence of these miracles is said to be the countless sacred lakes that dot the Tibetan plateau, most notably Lake Manasarovar and its more turbulent sibling, Rakshas Tal. These bodies of water are not just geographical features, they are living testaments to Guru Rinpoche's power. A lake that was once a demon's lair, prone to catastrophic flooding, would become a placid, turquoise jewel, its waters imbued with blessings. Pilgrims to this day journey for months to circumambulate these lakes, believing that their waters possess healing properties and that the act of devotion purifies negative karma. The flood is transformed. It is no longer a symbol of chaos, but a contained, sacred reservoir of compassion and spiritual power, a constant reminder that even the most turbulent energies can be mastered and redirected toward enlightenment. This mythic framework provides a complete spiritual ecology. It teaches that environmental disasters are not separate from human morality and spirituality. They are deeply interconnected. A flood is the external symptom of an internal, spiritual imbalance, of human greed or of a spirit's unbridled anger. The solution, therefore, is not merely a technical one of building higher dams, but a holistic one of restoring harmony through wisdom, compassion, and ritual. Guru Rinpoche's legacy is not a story about a past event, but a living practice. Tibetan Buddhists continue to perform rituals and prayers to the Naga spirits, making offerings to keep them pacified and to ensure the balance of the waters remains. In a modern world facing the floods of climate change, this ancient narrative offers a radically different perspective. suggesting that our relationship with the natural world must be one of respectful dialogue and spiritual responsibility, not one of domination and control. Deep in the sands of the Arabian Peninsula, long before the rise of Islam, powerful civilizations thrived by mastering the most precious resource in the desert, water. The most magnificent feat of this ancient engineering was the Great Marib Dam, a colossal structure that transformed the arid plains of Yemen into a fertile paradise, the heartland of the Sabaean kingdom and the Qahtani tribes. This was no simple wall of earth. It was a sophisticated marvel of masonry, an intricate network of sluices and canals that harnessed the seasonal floods, allowing the kingdom to flourish for over 1,000 years. The city of Marib became a legendary center of wealth and power, a crossroads of the incense trade routes where towering temples reached for the sky, and the land was lush with gardens and orchards, a testament to human ingenuity's triumph over a harsh environment. Yet this reliance on a single, monumental structure also created a profound vulnerability, one that would eventually be seared into the cultural memory of the entire region. The myths that emerged speak of the Qahtani people who inhabited this land of plenty, growing increasingly arrogant and decadent. They abandoned the old ways of gratitude and began to mock the deities who they believed had blessed them, their hearts hardened by their own prosperity. They broke sacred tribal laws and neglected the maintenance of the dam itself, ignoring the cracks that began to appear in its mighty walls. This moral failure, this spiritual corrosion, became the central cause of the catastrophe in the oral traditions that were passed down for generations. The dam's final failure was not a silent event. It was said to be heralded by omens, rodents gnawing at the foundations, strange rumblings from the earth, and the frantic warnings of a righteous few who were ignored by the complacent majority. Then came the seasonal rains, heavier than anyone could remember. The waters gathered in the catchment valleys, pounding against the ancient stonework with increasing fury until, with a thunderous roar that was heard for miles, the great dam gave way. A wall of water carrying the collective force of the unleashed reservoir exploded across the plain with biblical force. It was not merely a flood, it was an obliteration. The torrent swept away entire villages, swallowed the legendary gardens, and scoured the city of Marib down to its foundations, wiping the seat of a kingdom off the map in a single, terrifying day. The Qahtani tribes were scattered, drowned, or forced into a desperate exodus into the barren desert. Their once green world returned to dust and memory. This historical trauma, this story of a paradise lost through hubris and a broken covenant with the divine, did not vanish with the Sabaean kingdom. It echoed through the centuries, weaving itself into the spiritual fabric of the emerging faith of Islam. The Quranic narrative of the people of Ad and their prophet Hud, revealed in the holy cities of the Hajj, as not far from these ruined lands, bears a striking and likely intentional resonance with the older Arabian myth. In the Quran, the Ad were a powerful, tall people who dwelt in a land of pillared buildings, a description that easily calls to mind the monumental architecture of Marib. They too grew arrogant, rejecting the monotheism preached by the prophet Hud and persisting in idolatry. As divine punishment for their disbelief, a devastating, screaming wind was sent upon them for 7 nights and 8 days, a scourge that utterly destroyed them. While the agent of destruction differs from water to wind, the core moral and narrative structure is identical. A prosperous, advanced people defies divine will, ignores a prophet's warning, and is consequently annihilated, leaving only ruins as a lesson for those who would come after. The connection suggests a powerful process of cultural absorption and reinterpretation. The physical evidence of the Marib Dam's catastrophic failure, its broken ruins still visible in the desert, provided a tangible, awe-inspiring backdrop for a new theological message. The old story of a specific tribal downfall was universalized into a timeless parable about the fragility of human power in the face of divine judgment. The lesson was no longer simply about maintaining a dam, but about maintaining faith. The flooding of Marib became more than a historical disaster. it was transformed into a spiritual signpost, a powerful example used in the Quran to illustrate a fundamental principle that no matter how great a civilization's earthly achievements, its ultimate fate rests on its humility and obedience to God. The lost city of the Cotones thus serves as a profound bridge, a submerged pillar connecting the deep, animistic past of Arabia with the revolutionary monotheism that would forever change the world, proving that even a forgotten dam's collapse could ripple through time to shape the Word of God itself. Now we set sail for the vast expanse of the Pacific, where the horizon is an endless line of blue meeting blue, and the waves themselves carry stories of creation and survival. Here, in the archipelagos of Vanuatu and the Solomon Islands, the flood narrative is not one of divine punishment, but a foundational event that explains the very nature of humanity, the importance of social bonds, and the incredible seafaring prowess that allowed people to conquer the world's largest ocean. At the center of this drama is the complex culture hero Tagaro, a figure whose actions are sometimes foolish, sometimes brilliant, but always transformative. The story begins not with a corrupt humanity, but with a simple, almost accidental slight. In many versions, Tagaro, or his variant names like Cat or Tagaro the Wise, is going about the work of creation, shaping the world and its first people. The cause of the flood is often attributed to a mistake, a broken taboo, or the mischievous actions of Tagaro's rival, the foolish and clumsy being known as Suk or Maragbuto. In one telling from Vanuatu, the flood is triggered when a man breaks a sacred rule by bathing in a forbidden spring, angering the water spirit who resides there. In another, Tagaro's foolish brother kills and eats a sacred rooster or fish, an act of profound disrespect that causes the sea to rise up in retribution. Unlike the wrathful gods of other traditions, the deluge here feels more like a natural consequence, a direct reaction to a disruption of the delicate balance between the human and spirit worlds. Seeing the waters rise, Tagaro understands that escape is the only option, but his plan is not to build a sealed box to simply ride out the storm. His response is a masterpiece of practical ingenuity deeply rooted in Pacific Islander identity. He builds a giant seafaring canoe. This is no simple raft. It is a proper ocean-going vessel constructed from a massive felled tree, lashed together with strong vines and sealed with breadfruit sap, a testament to the ancient boat-building skills that allowed the first settlers to navigate across thousands of miles of open ocean. Tagaro doesn't just gather a male and female of each animal, he gathers the very essence of life and culture. He loads the canoe with his family, various animals, and most importantly, plants, yams, taro, coconuts, and breadfruit, the staples that would sustain a new civilization. This crucial detail transforms the vessel from a mere lifeboat into a literal ark of culture, carrying the biological and agricultural seeds for the future. Their journey on the endless waters is not a passive wait for dry land. It is an active, perilous voyage. Tagaro and his companions must navigate storms, hunger, and thirst, relying on their knowledge of the stars, the winds, and the currents, the very same knowledge their real-world descendants used to discover and populate every island across the Pacific. This part of the myth is a powerful celebration and preservation of that voyaging tradition, encoding critical survival skills into a sacred story told for generations around the fire. The flood itself becomes a metaphorical ocean of creation, the primordial state from which all known islands emerged. The flood's end is as significant as its beginning. The waters do not just recede to reveal a single mountain. Instead, Tagaro's canoe eventually grounds itself on a reef or a newly exposed mountaintop, which becomes the first island of a new chain. Upon landing, Tagaro and the survivors disembark to find a world washed clean, ready for a new start, but the story doesn't end with a simple repopulation. This is where the myth explains the intricate social structure of Melanesian societies. As the survivors spread out, they are often given specific roles, skills, and territories by Tagaro. He assigns one group to be fishermen, another to be farmers, another to be carpenters or chiefs. This act establishes the different clans and their specializations, defining the complex web of relationships and reciprocal obligations that form the backbone of community life. The flood, therefore, is the event that creates not just humanity, but human society as they know it, with all its diversity and interdependence. In some fascinating variants from the Solomon Islands, the story takes an even more personal turn. The flood is sent not by an angered spirit, but by Tagaro himself, who is enraged by the incessant mocking of his brothers. He builds the great canoe to save only those who are loyal to him, leaving his tormentors to perish. After the waters subside, he repopulates the world by creating new people from the ashes of a specific type of wood, each type resulting in a different skin color or character trait. This version adds a layer of moral teaching about respect, loyalty, and the consequences of social discord, themes deeply important in communal island cultures. Ultimately, the myth of Tagaro's canoe is far more than a tale of survival. It is a vibrant, living narrative that binds the people to their environment, justifies their social order, and honors the navigational genius of their ancestors who first dared to sail into the great unknown, forever seeking a new island on the horizon. Driven from the cliff's edge by hunger and loneliness, the woman knew she could not survive on that barren rock forever. The new world below, though vast and empty, was her only hope. But how could one woman, with only the clothes on her back, possibly hope to repopulate an entire continent? In the Sami worldview, the answer was not found in solitude, but in community, a community that extended far beyond the human. She did not look inward in despair, but outward in prayer, calling upon the animal spirits, the Siidi, who were her only remaining kin in this washed clean world. She understood a profound truth that defines Sami cosmology. Humans are not the masters of nature, but one part of a vast, interconnected web of life, dependent on the goodwill and cooperation of other beings for their very survival. Her plea was answered not by a deity in the sky, but by a series of helpers from the land and sea, each offering a vital service in the grand work of creation. A mighty sea spirit, perhaps a whale or a seal, rose from the depths and offered to dive down to the old ocean floor to retrieve a precious speck of soil, a seed of the former world. This earth diver motif, common across northern Eurasia and North America, appears here in a uniquely Sami context. The diver is not a lone hero, but one link in a chain of cooperation. With the soil brought up, a bird spirit, maybe a gull or a tern, took it in its beak and flew across the waters, scattering it widely. As the soil hit the surface of the sea, it began to grow and expand, transforming the endless ocean into the familiar, rugged landscape of Sapmi, the rolling fells, the deep fjords, and the endless taiga. But land alone was not enough. Life required sustenance. This is where the most crucial act of cooperation occurred. To breathe life into this new earth and into the woman herself, the sun, Biavi, shone down upon her with its gentle, life-giving rays. The sun's light in the Arctic is not taken for granted. After the long, dark winter, its return is celebrated as a miracle, the essential force that fuels all growth. Nourished by its warmth, the woman found plants beginning to sprout from the new soil. But to truly repopulate the world, she needed a partner. Different tales offer different paths. In one powerful version, the union was facilitated by the elements themselves, the rain and the wind. A rainstorm washed over her, and from this intimate meeting of water and earth, the first children were born. In another, a divine wind, Biga, itself a powerful spirit, made her pregnant. Her children then went on to become the ancestors of the various Sami clans, their distinct identities perhaps explained by the different animal spirits or elemental forces that aided in their conception. This myth is so much more than an origin story. It is a complete guide to living in one of the planet's most challenging environments. The entire narrative reinforces the core Sami principle of reciprocity. The woman is saved because she respects the cliff, and in turn she respects the spirit she calls upon. The animals and elements help her because they are not seen as lower life forms, but as conscious, powerful persons with whom one must maintain a balanced relationship. This is the heart of the animistic worldview. Every mountain, every lake, every stone, and every animal has a spirit and must be treated with reverence. A hunter must ask permission of the reindeer's spirit before the hunt and give thanks after. A fisher must make offerings to the spirit of the sea to ensure a good catch. To take without giving back, to exploit without respect, is to risk not divine punishment but a very practical consequence. The spirits will withdraw their bounty and survival will become impossible. The setting of the myth is also a direct reflection of the Sami's real-world geography. Their homeland is a landscape profoundly shaped by water and ice, from the dramatic fjords of Norway to the countless lakes of Finland and Sweden. The Great Flood can be interpreted as a cultural memory of the post-glacial floods that occurred as the massive ice sheets of the last ice age receded, transforming the geography of Fennoscandia and flooding coastal areas. The woman on the cliff is a powerful symbol of the Sami people themselves, survivors who have endured countless challenges from climatic shifts to cultural pressures, always adapting and persevering by maintaining their sacred bond with a demanding but beautiful land. Her story is not locked in a distant past but is retold and revitalized in the contemporary Sami practice of joik, the traditional spiritual song where the rhythms of the wind, the calls of the birds, and the spirit of the cliff itself are given voice, ensuring that the lesson of the flood, that we are all connected and our survival depends on that connection, is never ever forgotten. On the sun-scorched islands of Malta, where ancient limestone temples stand as silent witnesses to a deep and mysterious past, a unique flood legend whispers not of gods or rain but of a giantess's rage. This is the story of a being so vast her feet could straddle the channels between islands, a tale that offers a profoundly different perspective on catastrophe, one born from territorial dispute rather than divine judgment. The Maltese legend centers on a giantess named Sasuna, a figure of immense power who lived on the islands long before recorded history. She was a solitary being, perhaps one of the last of her kind, and she cherished the peace and quiet of her isolated home. She would wade through the crystal-clear waters of the Mediterranean, her head sometimes brushing the low-hanging clouds. The trouble began when the first farmers arrived on Malta's shores. These new settlers began to clear the land for their crops, cutting down trees and carving terraces into the hillsides. Their plows turned the earth and their animals grazed on the native grasses. To them, they were simply building a new life, but to the giantess Sasuna, this was an unbearable intrusion, a violation of her pristine domain. The constant noise, the smoke from their fires, and the transformation of the landscape filled her with a deep and growing anger. Her patience, stretched thin over seasons of disruption, finally snapped. She decided she would drive these pesky humans from her islands forever. Her method of destruction was as unique as she was. She did not call upon the heavens for rain. Instead, she strode out into the sea that surrounded the islands, her massive form creating great waves as she moved. Then she began to stir. With her enormous hands, or perhaps a giant staff, she churned the waters of the Mediterranean with terrifying force, whipping the calm sea into a furious, swirling frenzy. This violent stirring caused the sea level to rise dramatically, not from precipitation but from displacement and chaotic motion. A colossal wave, summoned by her raw physical power, rushed inland, flooding the coastal plains where the farmers had settled. The water swept away their fields, their homes, and their livestock, forcing them to flee to the highest points of the islands to escape her aqueous wrath. When her anger was spent and the waters finally receded, they left behind a transformed landscape, and it is here that the myth connects stunningly to very real, physical mysteries that puzzle archaeologists to this day. The legend says that as the giantess moved across the land, the wheels of her cart, or perhaps the sheer weight of her footsteps cut deep, parallel grooves into the soft limestone bedrock. These are the infamous cart ruts of Malta, a network of mysterious tracks that crisscross the islands, particularly at a place called Clapham Junction. Their true origin remains debated. Were they made by ancient sleds transporting megaliths for the temples, or by some other process? The myth provides a poetic and unforgettable explanation. They are the scars left by the giantess's furious passage. Furthermore, the caves that dot Malta's cliffs, such as the Gar il Khaber cave complex, are said to have been her former dwellings, giant-sized hollows in the rock where she once took shelter. This local tale resonates with broader Mediterranean themes of sea level change. The region has undergone dramatic fluctuations since the last ice age, and the memory of submerged coastlines, lost islands, and rising waters is encoded in the folklore of many coastal cultures. The Maltese myth of Sasuna feels like a specific, localized interpretation of this universal experience, personifying the terrifying and inexplicable force of the rising sea as the action of a wrathful pre-human being. It's a story that binds the incredible Neolithic temple builders, who themselves must have had rich mythologies, to the later peoples who inherited their islands and tried to make sense of the strange and ancient features they found carved into the very stone beneath their feet. The giantess is gone, but her mark, both in story and in stone, remains forever part of Malta's soul. And so we find ourselves at the end of our global voyage, having sailed through the waters of 30 different worlds. From the primordial blood of Ymir in the Norse sagas to the sorrowful tears of the Amazonian moon goddess Jasai, from the divine miscast of a Finnish singing duel to the practical failure of a Yemeni dam, these stories are far more than ancient relics. They are a chorus of human experience, a testament to a shared psyche that has gazed upon the terrifying power of water and felt the same primal urge to explain, to remember, and to find meaning in the chaos. What is so breathtaking is not that every culture has a flood myth, but why they do. They are not mere records of disaster, they are the fundamental frameworks we built to process the incomprehensible. They answer our deepest questions about our place in the cosmos. Was the flood a punishment for our moral failings, as the Greeks and the Maya believed? Was it a necessary cosmic reset, an intrinsic part of the universe's rhythm like the great cycles of the Hindu yugas or the Hopi worlds? Or was it simply a consequence of our own clumsiness, a colossal accident born from a trickster's error or a giantess's rage, as the tales from Melanesia and Malta suggest? These narratives reveal our universal vulnerability. Before we were divided by nations and ideologies, we were united by a common fear of the sky opening up and the ground dissolving beneath our feet. This shared vulnerability binds the ancient Mesopotamian watching the Tigris overflow its banks to the modern family seeking refuge from a hurricane storm surge. The medium is the same, water, the ultimate power that both gives life and takes it away with terrifying impartiality. These myths are the ancient equivalent of a disaster preparedness manual, but written in the language of the soul, teaching us about resilience, the importance of heeding warnings, whether from a god, a dreaming shaman, or the ants scurrying to higher ground, and the unbreakable will to survive. Yet within that shared fear, we also find our most profound hopes. Every single one of these stories is ultimately about renewal. The ark, the chest, the reed, the magical canoe, the hollowed log, they are all vessels of hope. They carry the promise of a new beginning, the belief that even after the worst catastrophe, a handful of the righteous, the resourceful, or the simply lucky can emerge onto a cleansed world and start again. This is perhaps the most beautiful and resilient human trait of all, the stubborn refusal to accept an end. We will always imagine a way to save the seeds, to preserve the knowledge, to ensure that the story itself does not drown. This enduring need for storytelling is the true magic. It is how we transform trauma into tradition and fear into folklore, A community that survives a tsunami doesn't just rebuild its houses, it weaves the event into its identity, creating a narrative that warns future generations and gives the past a purpose. These myths are the anchors we throw into the deep, turbulent waters of time to keep our cultures from drifting into oblivion. They are the tools we use to map the unmappable, to find a path through the flood, and to remind ourselves that we have been here before and we have always found a way to tell the tale. Now, this is where the conversation truly begins. We've journeyed through 30 legends, but the world is brimming with thousands more. Every valley, every river, every coastline holds its own stories whispered down through generations. What tales are told where you live? Does your town have a legend of a great flood? A story about a forgotten valley now under a reservoir, or a local hero who saved people from a rising river? Your family's history, the folklore of your community, this is where these ancient echoes live on. Share your local flood legends in the comments below. Let's continue this incredible exploration together and see just how deep and wide this river of human story truly flows.